What happens here changes the world. Opportunity zones. I've never seen more people excited about something so sometimes technically complicated, but the feedback I've been hearing walking through the reception area has been very positive. Who's having a fun day today? All right, I like hands up. Everybody's got energy. Everybody's had a nice sandwich. Uh, what a wonderful day for this event. 70 degrees, much better than 7 degrees just a few weeks ago. Thank you so much to our sponsors, CoStar and the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, and my team that pulled off what is a really incredible event. A full day event that's bringing together many of our partners that are our allies in economic development, creating one more reason for business success here in Montgomery County. So as you know, we have a wonderful strategic location. We've got perhaps the most educated workforce in the United States, 300 biotech firms, wonderful diversity, 1 out of 3 residents being born in a foreign country, a strong county government, great K through 12 school system, 3 international airports within an hour drive, a strong metro rail network, and now 15 opportunity zones to drive more investment in our county. Very excited for you to be here today and to listen to our expert panel and spend time with us this evening at Astrolab, where we'll have a small reception, which I look forward to meeting all of you there and having a further conversation. With that said, I'd like to turn it over to Jeannie Bonds, who will lead our next panel. And thank you again for being here today and investing in Montgomery County. Thank you.
Thanks, David. On behalf of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, we really appreciate the partnership. And Brandon, Sarah, Megan have been just terrific to work with. So we're excited about the afternoon. Everyone's now seen some zones and had food. And so we want to keep your energy level up while we dive into the technical aspects of opportunity zones. So our panel, we're going to start with Greg Clements with Novogradac. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things we're watching from the Federal Reserve's perspective. And then Rob Bachman with Enterprise Community Partners is going to round out this panel. And then we're going to dive a little bit deeper after you take a break and talk about Montgomery County planning and some of the things that they've done in this great county to prepare very well for a program like this. So I'm going to turn it over to Greg to kick off this panel.
Thank you. My name's Greg Clements. I'm a partner in the Dover, Ohio office of Novogradac Company, and I'm very happy to have been invited to participate in this wonderful event. So I'm going to talk about some of the technical aspects about opportunity zones. I am a CPA, so I'll try not to be too boring. So opportunity zones, the policy objectives of the incentive was to spur long-term investment, private sector investment in low-income communities. And Congress attempted to create a way to be frictionless and to reinvest capital gains into those distressed communities. It's interesting to note that it's the first national community investment incentive in 15 years. The last one was new markets tax credits. So we're happy to have that. And it's got the potential scale to make a lot of change. We're thinking that there might be anywhere up to $10 billion a year invested through this incentive. And it's interesting to note, and it's important to remember that the Opportunity Zone incentive is an equity product. So any investment dollars that a business would get would come in the form of equity instead of other forms like debt or grants. So it is an equity-driven incentive. Next slide. This is a map of the United States, actually excluding the territories. Sorry for that, but the yellow and the green are all the low-income census tracts in the country. And the green are the low-income census tracts that were selected to be opportunity zones. You can see that it's not a large part of the country. Next slide. Go again too. All right. So, what are opportunity zones? What's this incentive all about? Taxpayers can get capital gain, tax deferral, and more for making timely investments in qualified opportunity funds, which invest in qualified opportunity zone property. There's a lot to unpack there, and there's a lot of definitions, so we'll go through it. Next slide. There are really three tax incentives. The first is capital gain deferral. The second is partial forgiveness of that capital gain. And the third is forgiveness of additional gains. Slide. So the period of deferral, you can advance a couple times. The period of deferral is either December, go back one, is either going to be December 31st, 2026 or an earlier sale. So if you invest in a qualified opportunity fund and sell before December 2026, you are going to have to pay tax on that. The amount that's recognized is advanced. The lesser of the amount of capital gain that was deferred or the fair market value of the qualified opportunity fund investment minus the basis, the taxpayer's basis. It's important to note that the beginning basis outside the QOF is deemed to be zero. You never bought, you never paid tax on the gain, therefore you have a zero basis. You do earn basis when you pay the tax. Next slide. So this slide shows a timeline, and it illustrates the partial forgiveness of debt or of gain. So in 2018, a sale occurred that created capital gain. The taxpayer with the capital gain made an election to defer their capital gain by investing in a qualified opportunity fund. That's the investment timeline within 180 days of the original gain. If that taxpayer holds that investment for 5 years, there's an automatic basis step up of 10%. So now if they sold their investment after 5 years, they would be taxed on 90% of their original deferred gain. If they hold that investment for another 2 years, their basis gets stepped up 5%. So now if they sold their investment after holding for 7 years, they'd be taxed on 85% of the gain. If that investor holds the investment for 10 years, when they sell the investment in the qualified opportunity fund, they get to step up their basis to the fair market value, to the sales price. And that is an election that needs to be made. All right. So, next slide. So, opportunity zone designation is completed. The list is unchanging. Like we saw on the map, about 11% of the country was selected, and that was up to the governors of each state. You can find a list of the opportunity zones on the IRS's website. States also have economic development groups have their list on their website, but I included a web link here, and we have a mapping tool that you can put in any address in the country, and it'll tell you whether it's in a opportunity zone or not. Next slide. Here's just an aerial of the greater DC area showing you where the zones are and We're at the top of the triangle. Next slide. So what is a qualified opportunity fund? It's an investment vehicle that's taxed as a corporation or a partnership, and its purpose is to invest in qualified opportunity zone property. The qualified opportunity funds must hold at least 90% of its assets in qualified opportunity zone property, and the certification is self-certifying. There's a form that's pretty easy to fill out, but your friendly neighborhood accountant can help you do that too. All right, next slide. If you don't, what happens if you don't meet the 90% test? There is a penalty, and here's a slide that talks about how you calculate it. You just calculate every 6 months, and there's some nuances. Whether if you have a fund that started late in the year, there's some interesting things we can talk about there, but we don't want to get too far into the weeds. If you fail this test, next slide, there is a penalty, and here's how it's calculated. It's not. There's no recapture event like we like to talk about in other incentives, but there is a penalty for non-compliance. Next slide. Okay, so a qualified opportunity fund can have get satisfied the 90% test by holding 3 different types of assets. One is qualified opportunity zone partnership interest. One is qualified opportunity zone stock, and the last is qualified opportunity zone business property. Qualified opportunity zone stock and qualified opportunity zone partnership interests are what we call an indirect deal. And in the slide deck, you'll see a comparison of direct versus indirect. But the qualified opportunity zone business property is tangible property. That's the building, that's the desk, it's the computer, it's all the tangible stuff. Next slide. Qualified opportunity zone stock and partnership interests are investments in other entities acquired after December 31st, 2017, solely in exchange for cash. The entity must be a qualified opportunity zone business or is being organized to become one. And that entity must remain a qualified opportunity zone business for substantially all the opportunity funds holding period. We don't know what substantially all means in this context. So we're hopeful that the regulations spell that out for us. Next slide. A qualified opportunity zone business is a trader business in which substantially all of the tangible property owned or leased by that entity is qualified opportunity zone business property. And substantially all in this context means 70% of the tangible assets. In addition to that requirement, at least 50% of the income derived in that business is from an active conduct of a trader business inside an opportunity zone. A substantial portion of the intangible assets are used in the conduct of the business, and less than 5% of the unadjusted assets are in non-qualified financial property. Non-qualified financial property is cash, stock, loans receivable, warrants, any options. And the last requirement, as if that wasn't enough, is that a qualified opportunity zone business cannot be an excluded business. And excluded businesses are all the fun things like country clubs and liquor stores and racetracks, gambling facilities, all those things. Tanning salons. There's a list there. So next slide. Non-qualified financial property. Here's some information about that. I kind of went through very high level what those types of assets are. There is a safe harbor for indirect transactions, and it's up here on the screen. But basically, if a business receives cash, it can hold that cash if it meets all 3 of these tests. It has a written plan for development, and it can satisfy the substantially all tangible property test by satisfying this safe harbor. So that's going to be important for folks who are interested in real estate development for sure. Next slide. Qualified opportunity zone business property is the tangible property that is owned by the trader business and is used in the trader business. In order for this the tangible property to qualify for this, it has to be acquired from the purchase of an unrelated party at the 20% standard after 2017. Substantially all the holding period and all the use is in the qualified opportunity zone. The original use commences with that taxpayer, but if you're buying a building like this building, you bought this building, the original use wouldn't be in the zone with that taxpayer, so the statute allows for the owner of the building, the purchaser of the building, to substantially improve it, and that means spending more on the rehab than the cost of the building. There's a special next slide. There's a special rule for when you buy land and building. If you buy it as a package, you're going to want to know how much your purchase price is for the building and how much your purchase price is for the land. The proposed regs say that you only have to substantially improve the building and not the land, so it's going to be important to get an appraiser involved and know what the building value is. Next slide. Some readily identifiable investment types in opportunity zones are commercial real estate. We're having a lot of conversations with real estate developers. Opening businesses in opportunity zones. Think about franchises. You have, don't want to say any franchise, but any in your friendly neighborhood franchises could open a new business inside the zone. Expansion of existing businesses into opportunity zones, kind of along the same line as a franchise. And then the last is large expansions of businesses. If you think about a manufacturing company who wants to double production, maybe the new additions could be an opportunity fund, could be investments of an opportunity fund. The next slide is a comparison of direct versus indirect. I'm not going to go through this, but it's there for your benefit. And next slide here is think about opportunity funds and opportunity zone investment as just a component in your capital stack and not the only tool that you have in your toolbox. All of these incentives, LIHTC, new markets, historics, renewable energy, Follow 2s, and 1031s, all could have an important role in your project. So opportunity funds and opportunity zone investing isn't going to take a bad deal to make it good. It's going to take a good deal and make it better, and it may help attract capital that otherwise wouldn't have been attracted to your deal. So with that, I think I went over time, but I think we'll take questions after everybody. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, we'll do some Q&A after the panel. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about, I get this question where people ask, well, why is the Federal Reserve involved in these gatherings? So I want to explain that a little bit. So first of all, with the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, there are 11 other reserve banks across the country, and the Board of Governors. Together, we make the Federal Reserve System. And most of you are familiar with the fact that the Federal Reserve is the central bank. So you may know us for monetary policy. You may know us for payments. You may even know that we examine banks. But we also have a function called community development. So it's within this space. And in our district, for the Richmond Fed, is Maryland, D.C., Virginia, most of West Virginia, North and South Carolina. So we have a headquarters in Richmond and branches in Baltimore and Charlotte. So you're in the 5th District. And so from our perspective, we have a community development function in the Federal Reserve because of the Community Reinvestment Act that passed Congress in 1977. So with that act, we learned that there needed to be people in our reserve banks who talked to the community as well as to the bankers. So a lot of what we do is we work with the bankers and offer some training with them as to how they can meet their obligations under CRA. We talk to the community about how they can work with the banks. So that's really how this function evolved in the Federal Reserve. So it's through that we have a strong interest in any type of economic development program. And so what I want to do is just talk about some of the things that we're thinking about, things that we may want to capture from what takes place. And that's why it's important to us to be involved in these conversations and helping to make these connections and watching what happens in our communities. So I think the first thing that I would say is that this piece of legislation is very responsive. So we all know that across the country, there are areas on the coast, there's cities that are evolving and transforming their economy and doing really well, but we have a lot of places that haven't yet gone through that economic transformation. And that what this really had in mind was how to stimulate some of those changes and that redevelopment or new development in some of those underserved areas. So as Greg mentioned, it passed in December 2017, and these are low-income census tracts. So again, for the Federal Reserve, that links up with the Community Reinvestment Act, which are low-income census tracts. The definition's the same as the New Markets Tax Credit Program, and I've got a link in here for you to take a look at the mapping tool, just like Greg has. Next slide. Greg mentioned the policy goals. So I think what I would stress about this is that, we're looking at how to channel investment into these underserved, sometimes distressed communities. We haven't had a program like this since New Markets Tax Credit, so it's been a while. And, potentially this could be a huge program. That's another reason why the Federal Reserve is so interested in this, is because we haven't had one in a while. These are the low-income areas we're looking at. We're really interested in workforce and how communities change and adapt, and how this capital can go into these communities and help to stimulate some of those changes. Next slide. Greg talked about kind of the aspects, the real estate, and then the business side. I think like many of you I talked to at lunch, there's a lot of excitement around the expansion of businesses, new businesses, but we don't have any regulations, so we don't have a lot to say about that yet. I think there's a lot of conversation about the real estate side, but the business side potentially can be really interesting when we start to think about workforce and living wages and social equity. So hopefully we'll have some regulations soon. And that reminds me that I should say that everything I say today is my opinion and not that of my Reserve Bank or the Reserve System. Next slide. So this is kind of the way I think of it, not necessarily that Opportunity Zone is like the hub of a wheel, but really this whole area of community development finance, it's all about pairing and matching tools and how they can work for communities. So we have a lot of tools in our toolbox. At the federal level, when you move down to the state level, different states have tools. We were in Columbia, South Carolina yesterday. They've got a lot going on with a community development tax credit at the state level. They have an abandoned mill tax credit. So they've really started thinking about ways they can create some new tools to go into these communities. So it's really about how do these pieces work together. And we have the equity side, but I also wouldn't leave out the debt side, which is CRA tends to be more about debt. So we're certainly going to see some lending in these projects, and that would bring in for us community development financial institutions, which are a real important piece of the infrastructure in communities that help drive economic development. So how they work with these incentives, and then also what local entities may do with incentives, I think is a really interesting kind of piece of the puzzle of this field that's evolving of community development finance. Next slide. So on CRA, I don't know if there's bankers in the room. Can you raise your hand if you're a banker? So there's a few. So I did this slide for you. And so banks could certainly create qualified opportunity zone funds. There have been some banks that have talked about that. They could use individual investor capital. They could use unrealized capital gains. They also... I think a lot of the banks are interested in how CRA factors into this. As I mentioned, opportunity zones are equity. CRA is primarily debt, but there could be a relationship there that could achieve impact. And I think a lot of banks are thinking through that process and how that might look. Number one question that I get, and I do not have an answer, is in the CRA guidance, there's a phrase that says areas targeted for redevelopment by federal, state, local, or tribal government. It refers to empowerment zones of the 90s. The number one question I get is, will opportunity zones be eligible in that phrasing? I don't know the answer, but I put it on the slide so that you would know that we know you're asking that question. Next slide. So here are some of the things that we're thinking about in our role. So you've got mass potential for a lot of influx of capital, and then you've got a community, and communities are different. So we're in Montgomery County, probably a place that can really absorb that capital. But when I look out across our district, we have rural areas that maybe can't really absorb kind of a rapid flow of investment in their areas. We have very few guardrails, and I think it was intended that way, but I think that makes people like me who sit in an institution that is a regulator a little bit nervous that there's not guardrails. And then there's no owner for this project, or this program. So the states don't own it. The federal government doesn't really own it. The Federal Reserve doesn't own it. So I think part of the reason for having conversations like this is to figure out how can we get the funds, talking to the communities, and seeing if there's a match and making some deals. And since no one owns it, I think it's really up to us to have convenings like this so that we can make those connections and have those conversations. Certainly from our perspective and a lot of other organizations, gentrification and displacement. So what would this do in an area that was already gentrifying? You know, knowing that gentrification isn't always negative, but could there be displacement from it? And how could communities think about that and perhaps, you know, guard against that or prepare for it? Hotspots and deserts. We know the program was created to go to those areas that were underserved, but really, in fact, is the capital going to just go to the places that already have the pipelines and really not benefit the other? So are we going to continue to have hotspots and deserts, or could we actually see some of those deserts acquire some capital? But same thing for concentration in high-cost cities. So if a city, southern end of our district, Durham, North Carolina, it's turning into a very high-cost city, a lot of high-end real estate. Is this going to just go to that area and maybe leave other corridors out of the equation? Greg mentioned like the sin businesses are excluded, but I think about unwelcome or harmful investment. So if a community is focused on small business development, but they're attracting kind of large distribution centers, that could be an unwanted investment in that community if they really want to target more of a downtown and a small business feel. It could be the same with housing, types of housing that might be attracted. So is there a balance between where the investment's going to go and what it's going to create as to what the community is most interested in? Also, I think Rob will probably speak to this, but displacement of existing community development investments. So does this become so big that maybe some of the other foundations and other CDFIs that are lending in an area are kind of pushed out of the scene? Lack of reporting requirements and metrics. I know my colleagues that are really trying to figure out, you know, can we look at some baseline data? Are we going to be able to collect data or track some of these projects and really figure out at the end of 10 years, you know, did this make a difference? Stakeholder engagement, like we're doing today, critical. And incentives race. I sat back and listened in Columbia, South Carolina, and every time a city stood up to talk about their project, they were layering more and more incentives. Well, you've got this incentive, so we might do this incentive. So we could potentially have, you know, a lot of competition going on in an incentives race that may not be positive. Next slide. So I'm a former mayor, and so sometimes I have to put on my former mayor hat and think about, like, from the community perspective, how I would look at this. And I do have a couple of examples here. I think partnerships are really critical. That's what we're doing today with the Economic Development Corporation here. I know that in the west end of Charlotte, which is a historic inn with a HBCU, there's conversation taking place between an HBCU, Qualified Opportunity Fund, a foundation, and some other funds as to how that might work. So I think partnerships are really critical. And I also would say that national versus local versus regional opportunity funds. So in some rural areas and small towns, it might be more of those local funds that are incentivized to engage in those communities, where other places it might be more of the regional and national. Mission-oriented institutions like Enterprise, like some of the foundations, I think play a major role, and I hope that we can continue to have them in the conversation and bring them in a little bit more, especially when we think about impact investing and how to pair it up with other tools and credits. So I think foundations and some of those other groups are incredibly important. I know some states and even some cities are thinking about local government-driven funds and how they might do more with their public-private partnerships. Certainly zoning overlays, which again, for a county like this that has just a stellar planning department is not so much a concern. But the community having the vision and the capacity to actually enact this is critically important. So I would end with kind of what I'm thinking about as far as guiding principles for the communities, and that would be synergy and balance. So as communities are putting their plans forward, their prospectus, and we've got funds that may have an interest in infrastructure or transit-oriented development or remediation of brownfields, how to kind of balance and match that and make sure that there's a synergy. And again, I think that's a reason to continue to have meetings like this where we bring a lot of people to the table to talk. Social equity, as I mentioned, going into the business side of things, I think we can have some really interesting conversations about economic inclusion and social equity when we start thinking about workforce and wages and attracting certain types of businesses. Impact investing and those partnerships I mentioned, but above all, I would emphasize transparency. We always talk about transparency with CRA, and for this program, you've got funds submitting a form to the IRS that's not open and transparent. But again, I think when we come together and have these conversations, we'll start to learn more about the funds. We can create our own level of transparency, which is really important to making this work. So next steps, I know we're all waiting for these final regulations to come out. They've been pending. We had a shutdown. Hopefully we'll see some of those. Definitely waiting for some more guidance and regulations as far as the business side of the equation. And you all are gonna get these slides, and we're gonna post them on richmondfed.org. And Brandon's gonna put them on his site as well. But I've listed a few. Again, my disclaimer, I just picked out a few that I like to go to. The Urban Institute, I really like what they've come out with now with their financial flow, that you can take a look at counties and communities. I like their score data sheet that they have. Novogradac has a good list of the funds. The funds are all calling there and being listed there. CDFA has done some programs and has a good page on it. And of course, the Federal Reserve has had a webinar that I've linked here. And then on our page, when we have these convenings, we're posting a little bit about them as well as all the PowerPoint. And with that, I will turn it over to Rob, and then I'll be back and we'll take Q&A.
Hi, everyone. I am Rob Bottin, Enterprise Community Partners. I think we are three of us listed as experts on opportunity zones on your panel, on your program rather, which made me bristle a little bit because I feel like anyone being called an expert on such a young and still evolving tax incentive is interesting. But I certainly know this. If anyone is, these two are, and I am not. but I'm going to tell everyone I know after this that I am called an expert in something. So I'm excited about that.
It's aspiration.
It's aspirational. That's true. Yeah. So many of you may know Enterprise. Some of you may not. We are a national nonprofit committed to investing in low and moderate income communities to create opportunities, starting with an affordable home. We have been around since 1982. Jim Rouse, the developer, you may know since we're sitting in Maryland, founded us in 1982 with the idea that we'd be the sort of financial intermediary for low-income communities, and that's what we are. And since then, have invested over $36 billion in communities. That's in various types of products: tax credit equity, conventional equity, debt products, and so forth. Largely in affordable homes, but not only. Also community facilities. You see some of our impact there. So just a sense of how we work, and this is actually mirrored in our opportunity zones approach. So you see the sort of trifecta of capital, solutions, and policy. I mentioned capital. We invest both debt and equity products in opportunity zones, which I'll get to in just a minute. You will see how that's translating to our opportunity zone funds, which we're standing up now. Solutions is sort of a catch-all term for some of the programmatic work we do, including our, for instance, team of advisors that goes into work with cities and states on their community development strategies or their affordable housing strategies. We also have a data team that provides data and impact measurement. The way this is translating in opportunity zones is, our team of advisors called Enterprise Advisors is going in working with cities on their opportunity zone strategies. I would also point out that our data team, again under the bucket of solutions, has created a tool called Opportunity 360, which I'll get to later in the presentation, which was actually used early on by many governors to identify which census tracts in their states they would want to ultimately designate as opportunity zones. And then finally, the third kind of leg of the stool, policy. We operate on the federal, state, and local levels. As we speak, we are, again, translating this to opportunity zones. We are working with the White House and the IRS now to sort of push through some of the regulatory completion that has been referred to. So working on that. I mention all that because all three of those sort of prongs go into our own fund strategy. So Enterprise is standing up our own Opportunity Zone Fund that's fairly consistent with our overall strategy kind of writ large. So some of the sort of tenets of that strategy up here. The first one you see is long-term commitment, an equitable and inclusive approach. So I think kind of two key ideas there. Long-term, we want patient capital. We're thinking about sort of 10-year holds at least, and certainly responsible exits. We want to make sure we know what the exits are from the outset, but also underline equitable and inclusive approach. Obviously, as was the design of the law, I believe, we want to make sure that whatever benefits are ultimately accrued of a given investment ultimately flow to everyone in the community. So I would say notably those who have been there for a long time and who have been underserved or overlooked by the markets in recent years. Number two there, partnerships with local organizations, basically local stakeholders of all types to enhance incentives and mitigate risks. So we see partnering with communities as an essential piece of the criteria in terms of where we are investing. We see this obviously because we think no one knows better than the community itself as to what the community needs, most importantly, but also I think from an investment perspective, it is an important risk mitigant. And if we are able to figure out how to pair an opportunity zone investment with other types of incentives, as has been discussed, that can actually enhance the return profile of investments as well. And the third bullet here under strategy you see is really just a point about we plan to leverage our own kind of internal capacity as a fund manager and our sort of partnerships with developers. So sort of first step in the criteria in terms of types of projects we're looking at is, do we in fact trust the developer? Do we know them? Do we know their intentions? Do we trust them? dropping down to the execution, so how we're going to execute our strategy. I mentioned that we're a national organization, but we also have really a deep presence and sort of full teams in 12 metro regions. So you have, actually, here in the Mid-Atlantic, we have I don't actually know how many people are on that team now. I think up to 15 who work with many of you, I think, on some of various community development strategies. So we are, in terms of how we're sourcing pipeline, we are trusting our markets. So our own internal partners to surface projects that make sense. So again, as part of the screening criteria, we want to make sure that our markets are comfortable with whatever investment our fund is considering. The last point you see here is just the fact that I mentioned we are launching a fund that we hope, in fact, this will be the first of many funds. So we are, with this one fund, want to get out the gate and show how this can be done the right way, in an impact-oriented way, yet still meeting investors' expectations in terms of returns. But we hope to do many more. The goal now is to show how this can be done. I'm happy to get to this in depth during the Q&A, but really just at a high level, in terms of pipeline and types of projects we're looking at, you sort of see an imperfect grouping of categories here. Public-private partnerships, so a lot of the things we are looking at are coming to us through public RFP processes. So in some ways, they've already been vetted by community stakeholders and certainly leaders in a given city. In terms of residential development, I should mention, by the way, that we are right now really focused on real estate only, though we hope to, especially pending further regulatory clarity, invest in small business development as well. But we are focused on real estate now. So that second bucket there you see, residential real estate. We are mostly seeing at this point in time kind of projects that meet really the 80 to 120% of the AMI population. So I will say that we are, again, waiting for regulatory guidance on some of this, but we're considering some deals that actually combine 4% LIHTC as well. So we're exploring different types of paired incentives as well. Commercial. Mostly what we are seeing is actually mixed use, mixed income. So a lot of, a standard project would look like, for instance, in a large urban area where we work, part residential and ground floor, let's say, a grocery store plus retail plus office space for small businesses, let's say. So that's sort of the typical project we're looking at. It's really a mixed approach, essentially. Product innovation, that is more aspirational than it is concrete at the moment. That's more geared towards small business and sort of investing in entrepreneurs, though, again, we're starting really with real estate, and we'll get to that, hopefully, as things progress. In the interest of time, I might skip this. I would just note that we are also, I mentioned, everything I just described was our enterprise's own proprietary fund. We are also actually partnering with two kind of real estate partners in the Southeast, where Jeannie hails from, North Carolina. Rivermont Capital, who is actually behind sort of the master redevelopment in Durham. So I don't know if you know Durham now versus Durham 25 years ago, but they were largely sort of the master developers behind that resurgence. And Beekman Advisors, our other partner. But basically, I thought to include this slide because it's a different approach from what we're taking, though we are still involved. So for our own fund, we are typically working, as I mentioned, where we have a deep presence, and those typically are metro regions, larger urban areas. We're in a dozen or so markets, as I think I said. Here, this is focused on the tagline here, investing in main streets of re-emerging towns in the southeastern United States, is really meant to take a deep approach in a smaller city that we think has sort of promise for potential to reemerge, as we say. And the way that's working is sort of a phased approach, multiple assets, but the idea being that you're going deep in a place as opposed to broad. Okay. And I wanted to end, or at least conclude my presentation with I think what I was brought here to describe, which is really how are we taking an impact framework lens to our work. Well, number one, not this is a bit of a plug, but we have, I think I referenced our Opportunity 360 platform, which, as it says here, offers an ability to map, measure, and report on the impact of investments and evaluate their performance and the overall, ultimately, efficacy of the tax incentive. We are using Opportunity 360 as our, really, the way we're tracking whether our investments are doing what we say they will, but also, even before that, needs assessment. So are we, in fact, keeping ourselves honest when we think about an investment somewhere? Are we making sure that comports with the needs that we are seeing according to the data that this tool provides? So we want to make sure that's consistent. One more point. I would just say, there's a lot of regulatory clarity that needs to happen, but we are mostly focused on clarity around reporting requirements. So if there's nothing, as far as we're concerned, if we had to choose, I'm not sure a good way to put this, but we would certainly focus mostly on this. We think if there is not clarity provided on reporting requirements, we don't know where this tax incentive could go, so we are pushing on that. And for the next slide, our hope, and this is sort of an ideal scenario, this is what we hope one day each fund would take, a sort of screening like this. Are you asking yourself these key questions? So mission statement, investment thesis. Are you clear about what impact you want to achieve? Dropping down intended impact. Are you devising metrics to make sure that you are, in fact, measuring against that vision that you laid out above? I think this one is key. Community engagement. I mentioned the needs assessment according to Opportunity 360, but how are you, in fact, engaging with the community? Are you hearing what they say they need? And there are different mechanisms of doing that. I'm happy to talk about how enterprise goes about that. But I think we think this is essential. And then finally, I referenced this before, but the post-exit evaluation. Are you at the outset really providing a vision also as to how this will end? So what's the exit strategy after 10 or whatever years? We think this is key. We are, with our own fund, obviously we're hopeful and we have reason to think that this will get cleared up. Our friends on the Hill are telling us they're hopeful as well. The IRS has claimed that they will, in fact, prioritize reporting requirements in the next round or hopefully soon. We, enterprise, are proceeding as though it's already law, essentially. So I will conclude there. I think that is this kicks off our Q&A.
Okay, so there's do I have to turn on any? So there's mics in the aisles, and we're sort of blinded here. But if you have a question, now's the time to move to those mics and start posing some questions. Great.
Hi, thanks for this presentation. My name is Li Yang. I would rather think the banking and investment data from people to the business to the government is tangled up with all this kind of model. I think capitalist society is supposed to be plain and simple. So make a regulation very simple rather than all the formula, all those things complicated. And second is for all this, and I think this panel also mentioned public-private partnership. And if I know, especially very clear by the Rockville City Town Center project, I think that's extremely fraud and crime, and it's a very, very bad example of our investment or our business or our community. It's basically very abuse of financial property or whatever from local to federal to global, because the public-private partnership is influenced by all the think tanks, including the National Academy of Science, not just mention the Rockville City Town Center, because the way they use this is really misleading, as I said this morning. It's really misuse or public-private partnership, because the way they do is from the basic, from the first example, the beginning, the property, let's say that is private. Of course, you can always mix up with public, but the problem is from the beginning, they supposed to say, example is private, the output, final product is the output. And from the beginning, it is 100% of private, output is 100% of private. So in between this, they have an in and out and in and out from the design to the consulting firm to the construction and the inspection and everything just paid for the taxpayer money. So eventually, the public sectors have to pay for probably more than $100 million. And they also have to involve not only the city level, but also the county, the state, and the federal. So it's very complicated, but they go zigzag up. If you don't need this piece of land, government has to buy it. But if you want a piece of land, government can give it free. So this type of thing is very flawed, and the way they do things is also very criminal sense, because very abuse and official misconduct. And they can take away people's property. They may use affordable housing, they say that. But that's not affordable housing, because once you give the money to them, they can always sell the housing in higher price than competition under the capitalist model. So I think we have to say, improve the capitalist and competitive model rather than just every time they ask for something, you give it to them. And there's no affordable housing. Instead, the way they do things is you don't know who can occupy the housing unit. And you don't know whether that's their employee or their family member. But on the other hand, in order to tell you we have a problem of housing problem, they evict people without homeowners default. So I just wonder if you can really make the competition that improve the capitalist. If you want to say so, then let's do it capitalist. Otherwise, you do the socialist, government build housing, or you can use a private business habitat of humanity, and just use homeowner, the poor people to build the housing, and the government subsidize that, or government sell in very poor,
Excuse me.
lower level.
We have a very limited schedule.
Okay,
This
so
is a
I just like to say,
This
my
is a
question
question
is,
and answer. Please provide a question.
can we really make the people solve their own problem, or government use this government authority to subsidize it and improve the people's employment or their productivity rather than misleading, abuse, or misconduct? Because this beyond the project itself. There is system-wide. You have say racial profiling, they arrest people everywhere, they evict people everywhere, including you develop the project. They don't allow you to go their street, they don't allow you to rent the property or their housing unit. So the whole thing is meaningless. It's getting worse. So I suppose, I say that for a special Federal Reserve, you got to make the interest rate to help the education, to help the people rather than the other way around. Thank you.
My name is Brian Darmody. I'm from the University of Maryland, and I also represent research parks across the country. And in Maryland, for example, Johns Hopkins and an economically distressed part of Baltimore, the medical school, is Opportunity Zone. College Park is one. And if you look across the country, there are a lot of incubators and places for startup companies. So I'm wondering, I know the regs aren't out yet, but given we're in Montgomery County, we have a lot of technology companies. Can you talk a little bit about the potential for investing, angel investing in startup companies, and how the Opportunity Zone program might help that once we get, assuming we get regs that support that kind of investing?
Thanks for the question. I'm currently talking to a handful of folks who are interested in that as well, specifically in, in new technology. So they're hopeful that they can work out an arrangement with the underlying businesses that is advantageous for all. Um, the things I would think about, at least initially, is think about businesses with property that doesn't move a lot, um, and you could also think about place-based businesses. You could take your incubator. You could that could be a real estate transaction, and then all the tenants could be operating businesses, but they still have stuff. And if they're in a business that is very location based, so say there's lab equipment or something, and there's less stuff in the cloud, that's going to be the easier type of businesses to think about. Um,
Yeah, I would just add to that that some states are cataloging businesses that have received SBIRs and STTRs, and then working with tech transfer at the universities, and have convened groups of like in-state investors across that spectrum, so with angel to everything, to go ahead and have some of the conversations exactly what Greg mentioned. So I think there are some places where there's some processes in place that you might want to think about.
Hi, I'm David Fagan. How would a community, especially these are low-end communities, if they wanted to bring a project to an opportunity zone fund, since many of these communities won't have capital gains lying around in their communities from the people who live there, how do they go about, can they bring something, projects and potential desires for their community to these funds, say any of your funds? How would they go about doing that?
Yeah. So, we are an intermediary. That's our role. So I can tell you this: we part of what our value add is working on both sides. So we actually work with investors. We have mentioned all that naturally we have a lot of investor partners. On one side, we know we employ the criteria I was talking about before. So yes, to answer your question directly, a fund like ours would make sense. I think there's nothing prohibiting you from starting your own fund. In fact, if you wanted to, by law, tell me if I'm wrong, anyone can start their own fund, though.
An opportunity zone fund invest in another opportunity zone fund?
No, you cannot.
Can't stop.
But I would note that it is a simple form, and it's an election to make. So really, as someone in the community who has an idea for a business, all you need to find is a person or a company with capital gains to defer. And so, and that's really all you need is an attorney to write your operating agreement, and when you file your first tax return, you make an election. It's not there are a lot of complexities inside of that, but the idea is supposed to be simple. In addition to enterprise, our website has a list of funds for people who said we have a fund. So you can look on our website, and if there are folks who want to be listed on there that aren't, just contact the email address on the website.
Thank you.
And I would just add, I think that's what we're kind of hoping that we do with programs like this. We, in South Carolina yesterday, we let cities and communities stand up and talk about what they had and what they wanted to do. And then we had some funds that were in the room that reacted to that and asked questions. So maybe not the most efficient way of connecting the two, but just kind of thinking through how we can get folks like that in the room talking to each other. Yes.
So a related question to that, Martha Schoonmaker with PICMC, which is an opportunity zone on Montgomery College campus in Germantown. Our assets are managed by a nonprofit supporting foundation to the college. Would we be able to start our own opportunity fund to invest in the campus?
You would just need to create a partnership or a corporation that 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 would make the election. The question is, for me, is who are you going to get? Where are you going to get the money? And there's not really incentive for nonprofits nonprofits don't have capital gain. So you would need a taxpayer who has capital gain in order to partner with you in that entity. But you're right. You could do that.
The right answer. Thank you.
Yep, we'll flip back to this side.
Hi.
Yep.
I have a yes or no question, then a real question. The yes or no question is: can one opportunity fund invest in more than one qualified opportunity zone business? Just yes or no? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that was my real question. My real question is, Rob, you had a slide that had the pipeline on it, and that one was very interesting. It was encouraging. You had the workforce housing, where it's the unrestricted affordable housing at 38% AMI. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah. So really, what that was is market rate affordable housing. So it's just naturally, in the cases I'm thinking of at least, naturally occurring affordable housing. So affordable to that segment of the population. So 30 to 80% AMI. Obviously, goes without saying that many of the fears are that would change as investments come in and gentrification potentially follows. But that's what that was. So I mentioned that we're largely seeing at this point workforce that segment targeted 80 to 120 AMI, but we are seeing some market rate affordable housing below that too. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Okay, we'll go back over here.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to know if there would, with the SIN investments, does that include pawn shops and payday loans and that type of enterprise?
Well, doesn't specifically, but if you think about what kind of assets a pawn shop or a payday lender has, there are a lot of receivables, and so I would have to think about that a little bit. But at least initially, it seems like that they might get tripped up on non-qualified financial property. Any business isn't allowed to have more than 5% of its assets as non-qualified financial property, and that includes loans receivable and cash and things of that nature. So I would think that a business of that nature might get tripped up on that provision.
But you're not sure. Is that what you're saying? I mean, I just thought maybe you'd say yes or no. It's not, you're saying it's not that simple. Maybe they can squeeze
It's not
in.
that simple, but I think it would be difficult for them to comply.
Okay. Another question. Is there any allowance for minority and women-owned businesses to get a piece of this action?
There's no provision specifically that says that they have to get a piece of the action, but it's there for all of us, and so it's an incentive in the tax law that's available to everyone. So if you're a taxpayer, it's available to you.
Okay. Thank you.
All right,
Yeah.
well,
Hi, I'm Michael Scott, Equity Matters. One for Greg, one for Gene. So, Greg, you talked about active conduct, and I think you just drew a distinction with technology. Can you define that? Because we can talk about active conduct being lots of server activity, right? And so I wanted to get clear on that. And Gene, as you talk about social equity, can you talk about, so for example, I don't know if you're familiar with the Ujima Fund in Boston, which just launched with non-accredited investors partnering with institutional investors. But how are you envisioning the interaction with the zones in regard to sort of creative alternative finance structures like that?
So there's no we don't know the definition of active right now in the context of this incentive. In new market tax credits, active means generating revenue within the first 3 years of business. If you're a for-profit entity, if you're a nonprofit, it's that you comply with your nonprofit purpose within the first 3 years. The Novogradac Opportunity Zone Working Group submitted comments to the IRS for the regulations, asking that they adopt the same definition for opportunity zones, but we don't have any guidance on that.
Yeah, so so your example, I've heard a little bit about that. The one I've been watching is the Weston in Charlotte with the Knight Foundation and a group that's setting up an opportunity fund. And I think the way they're looking at it is Knight is already there making place-based investments. They've invested capacity in the CDC and they've already invested in that area. And Knight is looking at how they can do PRIs in that area to couple with that. So I don't know if I have a great vision for it. I think they are starting to evolve, and I think that's something interesting to be able to watch and document those practices so we can learn from each other.
And then finally, of any of you all, did you say that one fund cannot invest in another, but what does that mean for syndication?
So a qualified opportunity fund can't invest in another qualified opportunity fund, but the qualified opportunity fund can invest in a qualified opportunity zone business. So there's no allowance right now for what people are talking about feeder partnerships. I think there were some comment letters asking for more guidance on that and whether that could be a thing or not. But right now it's
unclear.
So with what it does to syndications, you're going to probably be, if you're interested in a big thing, right, you probably would want to work with somebody who raises equity and maybe charges a fee or is involved in the administration of the Qualified Opportunity Fund as a partner of the fund or as a non-member of the fund. I hear a lot of people talking about different arrangements.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi. So my question is, I noticed that you mentioned a lot of the firsts, especially with the enterprise. You said this was the first. With this program being passed in 2017, in the past, has there ever been an opportunity zone similar to this? And if so, what would you say are some of the differences with this program that with the tax cuts that was passed in 2017? What's the differences?
Well, I think the first I was referring to was maybe our first fund, but I would say, the notable difference for me in terms of this opportunity zones incentive versus those of the past, or at least one of them, is there's no real ceiling on, I guess, the potential for amount of dollars that can be invested through this incentive. I mean, most of the tax credit programs are capped. So like low-income housing tax credits, new markets tax credits have a cap every year, whereas there is no limit as to what the amount of dollars that can be invested through this incentive. So that's one notable difference, I would say. To you for others.
Well, and I mean, just in terms of thinking about other zones from the past, so empowerment zones or promise zones, those were more driven by either grants, federal grants, and then kind of a point structure, which we could conceivably still see with this. When the president did an executive order and created a council, we could probably still see some of those points and on the federal grant side that would go into it, but that was the primary difference with those zone programs of the past.
I think the other thing to add to that is the other incentives that were mentioned, new markets and LIHTC, there were more barriers. There was an application process. Historics, there's really no, in renewable energy, there's really no application process, but guess you do have to work with the National Park Service for historics. So this is available, and people can 2 or 3 people in the room today could form a partnership and make an election and put their $100 of gain they got from selling stock and do something with it.
So basically, you would say that the term that you used during your presentation was no owner. I think that's what you used during your presentation. It was referenced as no owner. So would that be one of the differences from the previous?
Oh, yeah. So
you
I
said
think,
that.
yeah, that was me. So, yeah. So there's, so in the past, yeah. So empowerment zones, the federal government really owned that program. Those were those grants that they were putting out. New markets tax credits, sits in the federal government. With this one, I think the struggle has been the governors were asked to designate zones, and they did that, but they haven't, whether it's a Department of Commerce or Housing and Community Development, they haven't been appropriated anything, and they don't really have any control once those zones are established. So I think it's, different agencies in government trying to figure out who does a convening like this. I mean, should this be the state that's doing the convening? Should it be groups like we have here today? I think that's kind of the struggle. And it also gets into a little bit, no one's able to vet these funds. So I don't have the ability to vet a fund and tell you this about it or this, because they're just filing that form with the IRS. So there's really no way for us to own that part of it either.
My name is Daniel Koroma, and my question is around, so in terms of the qualified opportunity funds, the investment into businesses, are there any priority industries that are currently looked at? And then for the lady, what are the conversations currently happening with CDFI in terms of how they would they be the primary, in terms of the vehicle for the opportunity fund investments?
So with regard to types of businesses, I think I see all kinds of ideas. Obviously, you can't invest in sin businesses, and there are some complexities. Someone mentioned payday lenders. There's complexities there. Other parts of the rules aren't conducive to that kind of business. But I think that if it's in the right place, if it's based on tangible property, that doesn't move outside the zone very much. I think if it's a economically viable business, it's got potential. There's no restrictions on it. There's no limits on how many of a certain business or another business. It's just invest in the opportunity zones and buy property and use it in your active conduct of a trade or business in the zone.
So on CDFIs, and then you might want to add to this, with in the early part of this, when governors were designated the zones, I know that across the 5th District for the Richmond Fed, CDFIs were pretty active in that process, just in terms of providing input and very engaged. There have been conversations between banks and CDFIs about what role they could play, but I can't point to anything specific that's happened yet. But I would say that CDFIs have been present at a lot of the convenings. We know that there'll be lending as part of this. So the banks with CRA, the CDFIs are looking closely at that, but I don't know of any structure that's been created.
No, I know of no structure. And CDFIs I know are exploring that actively, but as this is an equity investment, they are trying to see how they can either, complement equity investments. But in terms of structural, I think they're still trying to figure it out, as far as I know.
Some of my CDFI clients are just in the education realm, so they're educating their potential pipeline on if it's in the right spot. If that project is in the right spot, they say, hey, here's another potential source of capital for you that might complement what we're talking about on the CDFI side.
First, I want to say thank you for answering our questions in your time. My name is Mike Horowitz. I'm with CoStar. So my question is more of like putting on your gambling hat or your crystal ball 15 years down the road, and there's going to be a variety of metrics maybe to measure it. Do you see more investment happening in business expansion side or on the real estate side? You know, where would you kind of hitch your wagon to if you had to pick one or the other? Or both?
Well, I think what we're seeing is the first round of investments are heavily commercial real estate and residential real estate, just because that asset class doesn't move. And there is now been a deeper discussion about these big mixed-use buildings or commercial real estate buildings that are in people's pipelines, and people are dreaming about them and thinking about them and planning. Is what about all the tenants? What about the tenants in the building, and what are the incentives of those people who have businesses? And the answer is yes, if they're place based, that they could potentially have benefit, and it may not be as big as the commercial real estate owner, but it could be impactful for them in their lives. So I think as you think about commercial real estate, and then people have to fill that commercial real estate, and if businesses can qualify, then they could use the incentive too. So I think once the buildings get built and the property owners are trying to fill up tenants, that's going to be a more common conversation.
Yeah, so not a gambler, not going to answer that part of the question. But I'm more interested in the business side. So I think that's where we're talking about distressed or underserved communities that in some cases need to go through a major transformation. So it's about jobs and jobs that pay living wages. And conversations about artificial intelligence, what are the jobs of the future going to look like? I think that's how can we combine workforce training with some of these businesses? So, I guess I agree with Greg that once the real estate's there and you start talking about how to fill it up, there's just a lot of connections to be made with businesses that are getting federal grants, like on the technology side. And so I'm just hopeful, really, to see how some of those pieces fit together.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that beyond, so many variables in that question, including what does, the question around what percentage of your income has to come from within that tract, for instance, which is still spinning people's heads. So once that gets cleared up, I like to think my answer would be somewhat similar to Jeannie's as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
First, this has been very useful, and you and David Petter and everybody involved are to be commended. Second, maybe a simple question compared to these others. In one of the early slides, there was 180 days shown until the 1031 money had to be put into the fund. That's understandable and sort of normal. How long does the fund have to put that to work? Is there finding an investment and putting it on a list and going through those steps, or is it, how long?
Well, you're right. There's the taxpayer who triggered the gain has 180 days to invest in a qualified opportunity fund. The qualified opportunity fund has a requirement to perform the assets test. If you're a calendar year taxpayer, simply it would be at the middle of the year and the end of the year. So June 30th and December 31st. It's not as simple as that. I'm simplifying it, but the average of those two tests during the year needs to be above 90%. Otherwise, there's a penalty that's assessed. So right now the form is self-reporting, so you would actually calculate your 90% test on the form, and you can go work through it, and there you would calculate what the penalty would be, but that entity wouldn't pay the penalty with the filing of the tax return. they would submit the tax return, and then the IRS would send them a notice at the end. So the penalty for noncompliance is a monetary one. It's a fee. But to answer your question, the fund has until its first testing date, essentially. So if you invested your gain in October, your first testing date, if you're a calendar year taxpayer, would be December 31st. So you'd have that short window of time. But if you, to be 90%, yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Hi. I'm a little confused about the ownership question. I understand that this is the Opportunity Fund is an equity investment in qualified opportunity zone businesses or commercial. So what does that imply about, first, control of the assets? So if a business in a qualified opportunity zone, does the Opportunity Fund have some say over over what happens with that business, or what happens in that setting the rules and that goes along with the control of those assets? Does that equity imply control from whatever the Opportunity Zone funds, and also the flow of profits and income? I'm assuming that just goes straight back to the investors in proportion to their investment. And is there a potential that might, like if it was a startup with an entrepreneur who has relatively low stake in it and is getting a lot of opportunity, that his return isn't going to be as great as it would be if he had other forms of investment or debt?
So this Opportunity Zone incentive is in addition to all the tax law that exists. It's not in replacement of. Subchapter K didn't get repealed. So that's a really accountant-y thing to say, but it's what I mean by that is all of the rules around how profits get allocated to owners of partnerships still exist, and that doesn't really change. So it's going to be up to the owners of the business along with the investors, to negotiate a deal, and then the allocations of taxable income or loss are just going to happen based on the economics. So if you negotiate that the entrepreneur person gets paid this guaranteed payment, he's going to get income for that, and maybe it's a business negotiation, I think, is the right answer, and then the tax law is going to tell you how to allocate income and loss, to the extent it's a partnership or an LLC, inside of subchapter K. But even with a C corp, there's going to be how you allocate the cash from any dividends is going to be up to the stockholders.
This is a pretty straightforward question. The 180 days to reinvest the capital gains, if I understand it, it got interpreted that it's 180 days after the tax year in which the capital gains transaction took place. So that would mean for this initial time, if we had capital gains in 2018, we'd have to reinvest it by June 30 of this year, correct?
No, not necessarily. There's two options. So if I, as an individual, had capital gains, I would have 180 days from the date that I sold my asset and triggered that capital gains. If a partnership has a capital gain event, then it can either make an election to defer that gain at the partnership level, and that clock would start at the time of the sale. But if the partnership elects not to defer the gain at the partnership level, then the partners would have, they could either make an election to have their 180-day clock start at the time of the sale of the asset, or they could make an election to start their clock at the end of the tax year of the partnership.
Oh, well, so I guess the purpose of my question was for capital gains that took place in 2018, and we want to elect to do the deferral, we have until June 30 of this year to reinvest that. And my question is, one of the concerns we have is there are no final rules. So it's a simple question of, does the IRS intend to have final rules and regulations by June 30 so we know whether to invest or not? Because we don't know what we would be investing in until the rules are done. But I think we've got a June 30 deadline for that. And those who might have capital gains in this year, if they want to get the 7-year deferral advantage and then the reduction, they got to do it by the end of this year. But we need guidance. So do we know when the final rules are going to be done? That was really my question.
I would just say you can invest now, and people are investing now in Opportunity Zone funds. I would add to that the lack of clarity around other questions like around exit, and is as just one example, is holding people up from investing in certain funds, and those funds would like to take a multi-asset approach, as you normally would, just to sort of just to diversify. There's a big question mark hanging over that. So you can invest now, but it's those sorts of questions that we're waiting for, and we're anxiously awaiting guidance on that and questions like it.
Hi, again, just this is really great that all of you have come out to provide this new information. I have a real simple question, probably to all of you, and I want to give you sort of a hypothetical situation. So if I'm looking at developing a hotel, which is one of the real estate deals that you can do in a opportunity zone, and let's just play with easy numbers. Let's just say it's $10 million to build, and I have the land. So if I go after like a USDA loan or SBA loan, say for $5 million, then I'm $5 million short. So if I wanted to get an additional $5 million from an opportunity zone fund, then I would talk to a particular group or get investors to invest in that particular fund to provide those additional $5 million. So my question is, that's one part of the question. Then the other part, and let's say if I hold it for like 10 years hypothetically, and then that means the people that invested that $5 million in their capital gains now are relieved from that. What happens, and I don't know if this would ever happen, if for some reason people that invested $5 million from a fund wanted to pull it out for whatever reason, what are some thoughts on that? What would happen, or could that happen? And what part of that is it I don't understand, because this is all new for me.
Yeah, sure. So the investor's asset is an investment in the qualified opportunity zone business, right? The hotel. So they could decide to sell their asset, which is a partnership interest, at any point in time that they wanted to, and they would just have to deal with the consequences of that. They could market it for sale. They could market it to the other partners in the partnership. They could market it to third parties. I'm sure that they're in your business agreements. There's probably going to be requirements about notification, whether they can sell or whether they can't sell. So I think it's a big question, and I think a lot of it's going to just depend on what you agree to whenever you accept their money in the first place. But yes, they could sell early. They don't have to hold it for 10 years. They would just have different tax consequences.
I mean, they would essentially be forfeiting the favorable tax treatment, to state the obvious, that you get after 5, 7, and 10 years. So that's the obvious answer to your question.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm just trying to be sure too is, so if it's a $10 million deal and I got $5 million invested, and for whatever reason they tried to pull out, then I still owe another 5 million that I'd have to come up with. And so, but if they pulled out at 10 years, then according to from what I'm understanding, if it's a building and it's worth say 10 million and then they pull out, then with the equity piece, then I would have a note at 5 million and own a $10 million building, correct?
Yeah, I guess they're going to be a partner in the partnership. So the partnership's going to have assets to just if they do want to withdraw, they could either abandon their partnership interest or they the partnership could distribute them assets. But they may not be allowed to just withdraw and get assets. They could abandon their position, and then they would walk away with nothing. But then there's no upside for them. These are going to be economic investors. They wouldn't just do that. So we're probably thinking about a refinance event or something of that nature. But in order for those investors, if they are in a qualified opportunity fund, in order for them to get all the tax benefits that they hoped for, they actually have to sell their partnership interest in the QOF. And so, you probably, as a developer, I'm assuming, would probably want to make sure that you have in your agreements at least that you have a seat at the table, I would think.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, great. Really great questions. Thank you. We're rolling into our break. So I think we'll come back at a couple minutes after 3 and dive into what the state of Maryland's doing and a little bit more about Montgomery County. All right, so our next panel is going to dive a little bit deeper into what Maryland's doing on opportunity zones and then a little bit more about Montgomery County. So I think you're going to enjoy this panel. Frank Dixon is the Director of Strategic Business Initiatives at the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. And Gwen Wright is the Director of the Planning Department with Montgomery County. And Diane Schwartz-Jones is the Director of Montgomery County's Permitting. We know how important permitting is in development. So I'm going to turn it over to them, and we'll do the Q&A at the end of their comments as well. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. You're still here. Looks like everybody's tired, so I'm going to go quickly. I'm going to put a timer on myself, so I only get 15 minutes max here. What we're going to show first is the information exchange. This is a application that's built on Esri. It is meant to bring together in one place both funds, investors, businesses, and projects. And so since this is geographically based, the opportunity zones are specific geographical areas. You can find this on our website, as well as if you connect with me, I can give you the link to this application. But it's a visual application. On the left shows you funds. So we do have all of the national funds or local funds that have actually announced publicly that they are making investments in opportunity zones. Some of these funds are seeking investors. Some of them are closed funds, and they're not seeking investors, but they're seeking to make investments into the opportunity zones, whether that be into businesses or projects. And so on the left, you would see a list of both funds. This is a selection of Montgomery County, and on the far right of the screen is a jurisdiction selection. I selected Montgomery County because we're talking about Montgomery County here. Obviously, the other jurisdictions are there as well, and you can search and find. So if you're an investor and you wanted to invest in a specific area, in this case, we've narrowed it down to counties. and then that would bring up the actual both funds that are seeking to make investments. So if you're a business or a project seeking capital, you might want to reach out to that fund based on what their criteria is for their investments. If you're a business or a project that might be seeking investments, you can list. We have many projects. We have a few businesses. I think as guidance comes along and it's a little more clear as far as from an investor's perspective, what businesses that would meet the criteria to receive the investment, there'll be more businesses that will actually list on the exchange itself. We've predominantly looked at listing those projects that are near and dear to the local economic development folks' hearts. And so it's a start. We launched this January 3rd when the governor made his announcement for his sort of initiatives as it relates to supporting opportunity zones and investment into opportunity zones. As you can see on the right, there'll be a description. In this case, this is the project of Viva White Oak. If you were here earlier this morning, you saw a tour. This is obviously a rendering of what Viva White Oak could look like over time. Predominantly if they get their investment and they go through their proper planning channels to construct whatever they're going to end up constructing there. So let's go to the next. We're going to go to my PowerPoint here. I'm going to go rapidly through this. Some of the information you certainly have seen before or heard about, and then there may be new stuff here. But you'll have access to the PowerPoint to take a look at it, and my contact information will be there if you wanted to further talk about anything or had questions. We're zipping through the PowerPoint, so we'll get to it soon. Just so you know, Frank Dixon, I am the point person for the state as it relates to opportunity zones, and I'm not an expert on opportunity zones, except for I've spent the last 8 months learning about it. So that's kind of where I am. Prior to this, I worked for the Maryland Venture Fund, which was a state-sponsored investment fund investing in early technology. So I have probably more of an interest in investments and raising capital for businesses than real estate projects. But since I'm the opportunity zone person, I'm going to handle all questions as it relates to both businesses as well as real estate. And we're almost there. How many investors in the room? All right, I see a few hands. That's good. And how many government or economic development folks? A few more hands. How many property owners? Okay, that's good. How many businesses that are seeking capital? All right, we hope to get you funding for your businesses. So I'm going to quickly flip through this here, and then obviously I'll be available for questions at the end, just like everybody else. And I got 9.5 minutes. I'm not going to go through this, but Governor Hogan, I think through hearing my boss Ken Holt beat on him on opportunity zones for the last year, saying, "Hey, this is a great opportunity in which to make a real impact in communities." The governor took initiative and created a task force. He's proposed legislation for additional incentives, which are going to be, which are really geared to businesses. And so I think that is a good angle for businesses. And then also additional funding for some of the actual agencies that would help support the businesses and projects within Opportunity Zone. And so we've been working at it for a while, and we'll continue to work and support. Next slide. Next slide. So I wanted to give you an example. So this is probably by, I don't know, luck or happenstance. Since the governor decided he was going to have his announcement January 3rd, that means that Frank and a few other folks had less of a Christmas and holiday time frame. And so I went down to Florida just this past weekend. I got back last night, and I sat next to a gentleman. This was Thursday on the flight down, and he turns out he was a real estate broker from Donahoe, I think that's how you pronounce it. But he represented an investor that bought a building in Rockville. I think he paid $9 million, and he plans to do the necessary improvements for the tenants. He actually has a couple of other businesses that he's going to move from Greenbelt and put into that office building. And so I was just asking the real estate broker some questions and getting his thoughts. And so this is an example, real live example of an individual who is going to take advantage of the federal incentive in a couple of ways. One is he's going to take advantage of it from his real estate transaction because he's purchased a building, he's going to improve it, and then he's going to have tenants that are going to occupy the building. Half the tenants are going to be businesses that he owns that he's going to move in. So it's an example of investment going into the community. It's not necessarily an example of low-income housing or affordable housing that the state of Maryland does as it relates to the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. But it's just one example of that investments are being made, they can be made, and they're happening today. And that individual didn't have to come to the state and ask for money. He didn't go to other folks to ask for incentives. He just did it, right? And so, that's an example of what will happen throughout Maryland and throughout the United States as it relates to investments. In his case, I'm not sure if he's seeking outside investment in the businesses themselves, but I do know that he did purchase a building, and it will make improvements on that building, and it's along the Rockville Pike area, the one strip there, as you can see on the screen. Next slide. I'm not going to go through the legislation because I think you guys have been bored to death about it, but happy to take any questions. I think the key here is it is a federal incentive. I'll talk about the state incentives, but it is primarily a federal incentive. The good or bad is that since it is a capital gain and it's relating to a taxpayer, that's their personal information, and so if they don't choose to reveal it unless they're made to reveal it, likely that you're not going to be able to see the direct details as it relates to those transactions, for good or for bad. Next slide. This is a nice visual. You've probably heard about the incentive. I'm not going to go into the details of it. A couple of questions that came up previously. The investor does have 180 days in which to make their investment once they've realized a capital gain. They do have to put it into a partnership or corporation that represents the fund, and then the fund itself has to make investments. They will be tested, as the prior folks said, that the goal is not to have money sitting in accounts, and that's why there's a 90% test on the actual funds, that they have to invest their dollars into opportunity zones. Their taxes will be paid here, so this is kind of ingenious for the IRS, is that taxes will be paid, and so therefore, 6 years later, the realized gain that happens today that you don't pay taxes on, it will have to be paid in the time frame, the earlier of 12/31/26, or if you sell your opportunity zone investment before then. So the tax man will be coming. The real clear benefit here, obviously, is the long-term hold. Everybody's talking about, hey, I got to make my investment before the end of the year. I'm going to start losing out. Well, the reality is those are nice incentives. Those are nice discounts. They're nice deferrals. But the real benefit is the long-term hold, and that's why it's structured that way. That's why the federal incentive is structured that way, is so that they keep the money in the opportunity zones for a long time, at least 10 years. there were updates into the guidance that enabled folks to hold their investment and still keep that benefit up until 2047. So that's a long time, and it also enables investors to get more benefit, but it keeps the benefits in the areas where they're seeking to make an impact. Next slide. These are some highlights. I'll leave it to you. Obviously you've got investors, you got funds, and you got investments. There's criteria for all three of those. There's really limited criteria on the investor. If you've got a capital gain, or you're going to realize a capital gain, then you qualify. There's no minimum amount. That could be $100. It could be several millions of dollars. And as the earlier folks says, there's no cap on it, and that's really the key here, is that there is no cap as it relates to the investment. Also, making investments besides the SIN businesses, it is a broader investment category, if you will. You can make many more investments as an investor versus other previous programs that were empowerment zones and/or new markets tax credits or enterprise zones. So, adding the businesses in and a breadth of businesses, I think that they'll clear up the criteria to make it a little more palatable for the investors, that you can invest in a broader scheme. But we'll see what the guidance brings. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. So specifically, I think one of the things to mention here as it relates to Maryland's opportunity zones is that they were selected for the most impact. So there really had to be something going on economically that would make sense, that investors would actually come and invest in those areas. And so out of the 580 some opportunity zones that were available, 149 were selected. One of the other, or a couple of the other major factors are next to leading academic institutions that potentially would have business spin-offs that would be utilizing commercialized technology created in those institutions, as well as transit-oriented development. And so there many of the opportunity zones are around transit-oriented developments, which requires public investment in addition to public investment. Next slide. I'm not going to go into this. Next slide. One key factor here, Maryland is special in that in the dark green states, they are the states that conform to the IRS tax code. And so therefore, Maryland, in essence, Maryland's taxpayer is also going to get the same benefit, meaning you're not going to have to pay the 7 to 9% taxes in Maryland as it relates to your capital gain. And so states in red do not have that. They don't conform. So they're your taxpayer, and my time's out, so I'm going to have to go quickly. Is this. There we go. Is that you're going to get your 7 to 9% in Maryland if you're a Maryland taxpayer. Those in California, those that are in the red states, Arizona, South Carolina, North Carolina, they would have to pay taxes that are associated with their state. Next slide. I'm going to quickly run through this. There are many other programs that exist that you can combine and use. So if you're making investments in it as a developer and you're going to seek to get historical tax credits, you can get those as well as receive the same incentive as it relates to opportunity zones. Next slide. The key here as it relates to what Maryland's doing, the governor's initiative from a monetary perspective is about $56 million plus or minus a couple $100,000. And it really is focused on four agencies. Department of Housing is probably receiving the bulk of the funds, since we do make investments, i.e. loans and/or grants, to help stimulate the development within the community. Obviously, housing is the significant portion of that, but we do make loans to businesses in those communities as well. The Department of Commerce will if the legislation passes for the new tax credits, they will be managing those tax credits. Those are tax credits that are similar to the existing program for Maryland, more jobs for Maryland. And so quantitatively, the tax credits are going to be similar in nature. They will be going to businesses that will hire at least 5 people, or if the business exists in the opportunity zone, at least 5 new jobs in order to qualify. So that would be an incentive directly for businesses. And then certainly DLR will be they'll be receiving additional funds if it goes through the budgeting process and gets passed to help substantiate programs within the workforce development. And that's going to be on a location by location basis. TEDCO received or could receive upwards to $16 million. That's what's in the governor's proposed budget for investments in strategic infrastructure as it relates to the state. So those are the primary dollars, and I'm going to stop here because I'm going to suck up too much time. I don't want to give my other participants time. You can grill me at the end. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Gwen Wright. I'm the planning director here in Montgomery County, and we're getting a video going. I'm taking a slightly different tack here, which is you've learned a lot about when we're able to see the big picture, we're able to see how our communities When we're able to see the big picture, we're able to see how our communities are changing in a positive way. We see parking lots and asphalt turning into trees and green roofs and lawns. We see places that have been sort of inhospitable turning into communities and gathering places. And that is a very, very fulfilling and exciting way to see our work that we have been so invested in actually coming into reality. We've really taken planning in Montgomery County in a new direction. Instead of doing large regional plans with thousands of acres, we're doing finer grained plans. They are real, they are not theoretical. We see the actual projects being built as an outcome of those plans. We are not in the business of just doing theoretical planning. We are trying to build communities, and we see that happening with the new projects that we have seen under construction over the last couple of years.
Since I've been on the planning board, and it really hasn't been that long, we've seen a noticeable increase in the quality of projects that have been proposed and increasing responsiveness on the part of developers to elevate the quality design and raise expectations for what we can expect in the suburbs. We need to make sure that we continue to be the kind of place that people who have choices about where to live and work are going to want to be here. So part of that is great design. Some of that is about architecture. It's also about accessibility for biking and walking.
We are here to build communities and to enhance our existing communities, and that's what it's really about. Thrown at you. Again, I think our take on things, and I think the colleague who's going to be speaking right after me, Diane Schwartz-Jones, is going to be somewhat in the same vein of why is it that you really should invest in Montgomery County, and how can we make sure that our regulatory and entitlement processes are as efficient as possible so that you can actually meet some of the deadlines for Opportunity Zone projects. Just briefly, Montgomery County is a suburban county, but we're changing that. We're turning parking lots into places. Next. And we are looking at it in the context of our general plan, which is wedges and corridors. Corridors of development separated by green wedges. Our biggest green wedge is our agricultural reserve, which is in the dark green. It's over 90,000 acres. And but along our corridors of development, I-270, Wisconsin Avenue, Georgia Avenue, Colesville Road, we have a variety of nodes of development, and a number of those are designated as opportunity zones. Next. Our key goals are to promote transit-oriented development and concentrate our density near infrastructure, protect that agricultural reserve, and provide affordable housing. We have one of the earliest inclusionary zoning programs in the United States. It was started in 1974, where we require developments over 20 units to provide 12.5% moderately priced dwelling units, MPDUs, which are affordable to folks who make around 60% of the area median income. We have a variety of other incentives to produce affordable housing in our master plans, and if you provide over 25% affordable housing in a project, you could be exempt from impact taxes. Next. As a county, we are growing more slowly. We had a real burst of growth between 1940 to about 1970. But next, please, we are still growing. And we are projected to be at about 1.2 million population by 2040. We are a county today where the majority of our residents are people of color. 55% of our residents are people of color. And we project that by 2040, 2045, that number may go as high as 70%. And so we are a very diverse county. We're a very highly educated county. And we are growing in a steady way. We are a mature county. Next. We have a lot of existing constraints, both environmental and man-made, and that means that only about 19% of our county is unconstrained, meaning areas where development is really possible and really viable. And those areas, luckily, are along some of our corridors. They are what you see in white on this map, and they are in some of our opportunity zones. Next. As a county, what we see as our challenges is to focus on infill instead of greenfields development, to provide that infrastructure to support the transit-oriented development, including putting the T in TOD, getting the transit built, such as the Purple Line, and I know there was a tour of Purple Line communities this morning. Making sure that we can build the new schools that we need, even if we have to do some innovative school design, and providing sufficient affordable housing for the workforce that we need in this mature county. We want to have finer grained plans and make sure that each community is recognized as being very special and unique. We want to establish placemaking features and make sure that we understand one size does not fit all. We are a very large county, and we need to recognize that and know that there are going to be solutions in Clarksburg that are going to be different than the solutions in Silver Spring, that are going to be different than the solutions in White Oak. Next. What we like to call our goal is new suburbanism, that we want to plan for new suburbanism. We want to use actually some of the characteristics of really late 19th, early 20th century suburban developments. They used space and land efficiently. They may be near transit. Many of the old suburbs were on trolley lines, but they don't necessarily need to be near transit. They were very walkable, bikeable areas, lots of opportunities to drive, walk, bike or take transit, a mix of uses and building types, and very important, great streets, great public realm, great public gathering places. And that is something we think is important in all of our projects in Montgomery County. Next. We've been working to implement that new suburbanism, and we've created a lot of transit-oriented development in places like Chevy Chase Lake, which is on the Purple Line, White Flint, which is on the Red Line of the Metro, and Grosvenor Strathmore, which is also on the Red Line. But we're really also reimagining older suburban centers like West Bard, Montgomery Village, and Rock Spring. All of these that I've listed are areas where we have done master plans and where we're busily implementing those master plans. We have also done master plans for places like Long Branch and Tacoma Langley. We haven't seen a lot of implementation in those areas yet, but we hope that the opportunity zones may be the key to seeing some more implementation. Next. So our development process. The first step is the master plan. And again, we've done a lot of master plans over the last 5 or 10 years. And what we do after we complete a master plan, this is actually Pike and Rose as an example, is that we do what's called a sectional map amendment, where we actually apply the zoning to the property. So you don't have to get a rezoning. It means that many of these properties where we've done recent master plans and applied the sectional map amendment are actually sort of ready to go, shovel ready. You don't need to go in and start asking for an amendment to a master plan or a rezoning. It's done. So the main things would be to work through the preliminary and site plan process and then start construction. In terms of preliminary and site plan, those are processes that you go through with the planning department. After you've gotten your site plan approval, you move on to the Department of Permitting Services. Diane is going to talk about that, and that's where you move towards your building permit and being able to start construction. Next. The other thing that we do is work to ensure that there are adequate public facilities. And that is very important. It's something that our residents care about a great deal, but it's also something that is good planning. And we, again, have one of the earliest growth policies in the country, an adequate public facilities ordinance. And we look at that as we're developing our area master plans and also through our regulatory process with our subdivision staging policy. The picture that you see is actually not only construction of a new building in Bethesda, but it's also the location of the western end of the Purple Line. And the Purple Line is a very important piece of transportation infrastructure. Next. We also emphasize great design and creating places. That's been one of my mantras since I came here about 5 years ago as planning director, is that we need to insist upon the most excellent design and the most high quality projects. We are a great county, and we are worth the highest quality of design and development. We've done a whole series of educational events and conferences. We do an annual awards competition. We have a design advisory panel in downtown Bethesda. We do a lot of design guidelines for our master and sector plans. And we've engaged in a variety of really exciting placemaking activities, the most recent of which was last October in the Randolph Hills Shopping Center, which was in partnership with a group out of Dallas called Better Block, and it was an opportunity to work with the community and with the owner of that shopping center to show what kind of opportunities might come with redevelopment for creating great public spaces, for engaging small businesses. We did a 2-day event, and all of the local small businesses were able to set up kiosks and sell their goods and get their products to be better known within the community. It was an exciting event. Next. Just quickly, I'm going to describe a few projects. Some of these are along the Purple Line, and I'm mainly showing them to you to explain that we really are able to process even very large projects in a very timely way. Our regulations require that we review preliminary plans and site plans in 120 days, and we work hard to try to accomplish that. The Marriott headquarters in Bethesda is over 1 million square feet of development. It was submitted in August 2017, approved by the Planning Board in December 2017, and was under construction by summer of 2018. That is a pretty amazing schedule for a project of that size. Next. We also have done a very complex project right at the location where the Purple Line and the Red Line meet in Bethesda. It's called 7272 Wisconsin Avenue. It involved moving a historic building, constructing the infrastructure tunnel for the Purple Line and the Capitol Crescent Trail. But even with all of that, we worked very hard to make sure that the building was going to be exciting and innovative and have a wonderful public plaza that was going to be a gathering place in downtown Bethesda. So again, the emphasis is provide the infrastructure, make it a really viable project, but also make it beautiful and make sure it's of the highest quality. Next. Chevy Chase Lake. This is exciting because, again, you may have seen it on your tour. It's a public-private partnership between our Housing Opportunities Commission and a private developer that took a small number of affordable units owned by the Housing Opportunities Commission, and through the partnership created about double the number of affordable units that had existed previously. It took some low garden apartments owned by Housing Opportunities Commission and converted it into a 200 multifamily units and 62 townhouse units, again with a very high affordable housing component and a civic green. And this is adjacent again to infrastructure, to the Purple Line and the Capitol Crescent Trail. Next. Downtown Silver Spring, we've been able to revitalize an area called the Ripley District, which has been pretty desolate for a long time. It was essentially warehouses and Quonset huts, and it's becoming great new residential and retail development. And we're excited that this building is actually pretty much topped out, and we hope it will be finished by the end of this calendar year. Next. And United Therapeutics. It's amazing that we have actually been able to build a major biotech facility in a transit-oriented central business district. It is also a net zero building, which is pretty extraordinary, has amazing public art and educational components, and it's a real landmark in Silver Spring. Next. We're also focusing in places, again, along our corridors, not just the Purple Line, White Flint. Again, you probably have heard about that, but we are so excited to take some older mid-century strip center shopping centers and turn them into really new communities. Pike and Rose is an example, which you see on the screen, where it was a strip shopping center. It's become a grid system of streets with buildings, shops, restaurants, residential, office, and it is becoming a true hub of activity. Next. Shady Grove Station, which again is metro accessible. Right next to the Shady Grove Metro Station, we historically had what you see in the red circle, a bus depot. Our park and planning shop for fixing our trucks. Very, very industrial uses that did not make the most of the location next to the metro station. What it is being developed as is what you see directly above the red circle. You can see the sort of the same shape is going to be a whole series of residential townhouses, multifamily housing, some retail, some office, a new elementary school, a new local park, and a library site. Again, taking a parking lot and converting it to a place, a real community. Next. Of course, I'm not even going to talk a whole lot about Viva White Oak because you've heard so much about it, but it's sort of the ultimate in taking 300 acres of land that's currently a gravel pit and a composting area for the county and turning it into a new town. And it actually is going to be very, very exciting with a school site, a sort of central downtown area, a civic building, lots of recreation. I know Jonathan Jen is here and has probably shared with you some of the vision. And what's exciting is that it's in the eastern part of Montgomery County in an area that has not had as much redevelopment over the years and is a great opportunity to really bring some excitement to what is an underutilized part of the county. Next. If you want to learn more about our projects, there are a whole variety of resources that we have. Mainly the trick is to get to our website, montgomeryplanning.org, and then you can search through all of our various tools that we have. The main message, again, that I want to share today is that Montgomery County is a great place to live, work, and play. It is a great place to do business. Opportunity zones are going to help us achieve the kind of vision that we have been working towards in a lot of the different communities in the county. And we are excited and absolutely willing to go to the map to work with you all to make Opportunity Zone projects a reality. And that's it. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I am Diane Schwartz-Jones. I'm the Director of the Department of Permitting Services. And appropriately, I'm the last speaker, although I appreciate you all hanging around at the very end of the day. Ironically, permitting is sort of the last step in the process, part of a process that all of us have something to do with, probably has some of the most detailed plans when you get to us. But I wanted to talk today from the perspective, I'm sort of a reformed government transactions attorney, and I was trying to think in terms of what you might be looking for, whether you're an investor or a developer, and focusing on what is it that we can do to help you. Because truly that is what we want to do. Whether you are in an opportunity zone, and the opportunity zones are very exciting, but whether you're in an opportunity zone or you're choosing any other piece or parcel of property, we want to help you be successful. And we have tools that can do that, and we have people that can do that, and we have a willingness to do that. We're actually I'm standing in the AFI Silver Theater. Montgomery County was a partner in the redevelopment of this, and I actually had the pleasure and honor of doing the agreements on this. And sort of our mantra on this really was that we wanted the developer to hit it out of the park. And that's what we want the investors to do. That's what we want real estate developers, and that's what we want businesses to do. We want you to hit it out of the park. And there are a number of ways that we can help you. We can help you, and actually, as you can see, this slide is entitled Concept to Occupancy. We can help you get information that you need for your site selection. We can help you with the information that you might need and point you at your fingertips to the right places about doing your feasibility or due diligence. We process over 6,000 information requests every year, probably the most, the most in any other agency in county government. And why is that? Why is that? It's because people need the records for their investment, for investment transactions, for financing, for refinancing, construction loans, permanent loans, whatever it might be, occupancies. They need the records. They come to us, and we will help you get it. Zoning confirmation letters, design consultations, case management, permitting and inspections, concurrent reviews, next day inspections. There's lots of things that we can help you with. And I wanted to, next slide, please. What we'll do now is I wanted to walk you through a little bit, and this is all, by the way, from our brand new website, which I hope you all will visit. We have a slide on our new website as to what you do before you buy or lease. And if you go to this, you can see right here, for example, what are some of the starter basics? Maybe you need information about a business, portal, you need assistance with a business plan, whatever it might be. We have a link for you to get it there, but you can also do data searches. You can, as you can see there, request DPS records, get your zoning confirmation. Look at the zoning map. There was talk about the uses. You're thinking about investing in a particular type of use to go into a particular place. Well, what does the zoning allow? You can go see for yourself, and it's right there at your fingertips. Or we can help you. You want to buy property, you want to close on a loan. Your lender wants to know, well, is that really going to be, that use going to be allowed in the zone? We'll give you the letter that will confirm it, and this is where you go to get it. And how do you start? Well, one of the things you're going to want to know, well, what's my plat? Where's my plat? We have a link to plats.net right from our website. Everything that you could think about that you might need is right there. So plats.net, the Maryland land records, the Maryland State Department of Assessments and Taxation, the real property search that you might be interested in, and then links to some of our colleagues, the other folks who may have a piece in what you're doing or who can help you do it. Next slide, please. And so how you go and search for information on a property is really quite easy. These are online services, what you're seeing in those little buttons at the top. You go to the data search, you can enter the address, and as you can see by the little blue arrow, that will tell you that's where the address goes, and then the little swirly around there. Okay, by the way, that's One Veterans Plaza, which happens to be where the Silver Spring, the new Silver Spring Civic Building is, not so new anymore, but there are 34 records or 35 records for that. Oh, you cannot hear me. I apologize. Usually people don't complain about me being soft-spoken. So can you all hear me now? Okay, so you can go there, you could get the records, and then you can see what might be going on a property, whether it has to do with a complaint about the property, a permit, any type of enforcement action that might have been taken. You can then click on it and get a little bit more information just to, when you're thinking about where the property that you might want to invest in, you've identified your opportunity zone, and now you're looking at specific properties within it. Next slide, please. And then if you want to actually get copies of records, which we know, we really truly do know how important this is, both to your decisions in your feasibility due diligence and also for your design team as you're getting ready to think about how to design a project, whether it's an alteration for a tenant fit out, whatever it might be. You can just go online, you go to the records request, you fill in the property address that you want it for, you've got your name and information, and all you have to do is check the box, and we will provide you with the records. Generally speaking, we don't even charge for this unless it's a very deep, detailed search, but we do maintain the records going pretty far back. We can get you building plans, whatever it is that you need it. If it's going to take more than 2 hours of work, then under the regulations, there's a modest fee, a very modest fee that goes with that, but by and large, that wouldn't be the case. Next slide, please. So my lender wants a zoning confirmation letter. I've already shown you that we will get it. We'll provide it for you. There's a link for it. One of the things on our new website that you will see, we actually are mapping out all of the processes for anything that you go to. You'll see something similar, I hope, when we get to the commercial permit link on this slide, but it's right there, your process guide. You make the request, how you pay the fee. Actually, we do charge, again, a modest fee for the zoning confirmation letters to cover the cost of our time. And then you get your letter, and you take it to your lender, or you give it to the attorney who's going to be writing the zoning opinion for your lender. Next slide, please. So I've picked my site. I found my information. What do I do now? Well, what we want you to do is we want you to come see us. We want you to talk to us. We do free design consultations. You can actually sign up online. There's, again, one of our buttons on from our homepage, design consultation. You can actually book the time online. And what we will do in that design consultation, we want you to bring your design team with you, even if it's just the beginnings of your design team, and sit down with us and talk to us. We will bring all of our disciplines for any area that you might have a question about. We will bring our sediment control people. We are a one-stop shop. I saw that Frank had that as a best practice in one of his slides. We are definitely a one-stop shop. We'll bring sediment control, the stormwater, if you need it. We will bring our fire protection system folks. We will bring our architectural, life safety, mechanical. We'll bring the zoning site plan folks together. Anybody, fire marshal, anybody that you need to have around the table to talk to you about your plans so that you can make sure that as your design team is preparing the plans, that you are getting, you'll come in with your best prepared plans. And if you've got questions so you can understand what you need to do. Next, oh, I'm sorry, stay on this slide, please. The other thing we have is we have basically a concierge service, which, again, we do not charge separately for the concierge service. Your permit fee covers all of it. The concierge service we call case management. Anybody can apply to be in it, and particularly for something like an opportunity zone project or a strategic economic development project, we will put it into our case management service. We will assign a staff who will schedule the meetings, and it'll be multiple design consultations. You bring your team, we take minutes together, we share the minutes, we know who has what tasks, and we shepherd this through every step of the process to make sure that you get what you need on the timeline that you need it. Next step, please. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, we are a one-stop shop. We have our sediment control, our right-of-way, our building, our trades, the green building. We do green building as a requirement, zoning and site plan folks. And we also have provided an office in our offices for WSSC. If you have a WSSC issue, you can bring them. We'll bring them in. You let us know. We bring them to the table. And we also oftentimes will ask our colleagues from Park and Planning to participate as well so that we can make sure that we can meet your timeline, whatever your timeline might be. We view this as a partnership, so we want to make sure that everybody is turning things around just as we will commit to you to turn things around quickly. You can get to us any number of ways. Next slide, please. We have what I would call multimodal access to what it is that you're looking to do. If you're looking for a permit, we call it the donut, but that colorful wheel, you can click on any one of those colorful wheels. It'll take you to the business process under that topic. You can go to our mega menu, which is the little picture in the middle, which will pull down all of the different types of permits that we do. So if you want to get a quick look and you know what you're looking for, you can go to it that way. And then also we divide it from the top blue bar. If you are a professional or a business, you can pull down on one of those and it will have information that is tailored to what your needs are. One thing that we have not talked about is food establishments. If as part of the opportunity zone business investment you're looking to make, there's a food service or something with a food industry related to it, we ask that you come join us. This is not up here, but it's called Recipe for Success. Tell us that you want to do a Recipe for Success design consultation. We will bring WSSC, all of our folks to the table. We'll bring Health and Human Services to the table. If you're looking to serve alcohol, we will bring alcohol to the table. And we will make sure everybody that you need to help you get through the process is there. And on our website, all of the applications that you might need for that type of an establishment are all in one location. Next slide, please. So our process guides offer you step-by-step instructions. And our intent here is to make it clear and easy so that as you're thinking about and planning your project, what are the various steps of what I need to do? You can go to the process guide. This one here happens to be for, I believe, an alteration. I think I clicked on. I don't have my glasses. I'm not keeping up. It's either new construction or alteration for commercial, but it tells you every step that you need to do from the application all the way through getting you to your point of occupancy. Next step, please. Next slide. We use electronic services. We would like, as I said, we'd like your team to know how to use electronic services for commercial construction. We do require that, particularly for new construction, we require that people apply online and that they use our electronic plans. This is really significant. Our average turnaround time for our commercial reviews is about 20 days approximately. We are able to do this because unlike paper plans, which goes from one discipline to the next, we actually are doing concurrent reviews, which you can do with electronic plans, but you cannot do it with paper plans. We would also like the owner, you as the owner or the investor, so that you can know what's happening in your project. This is a very transparent process. You can be a signed-on viewer, if you will. You can look and see as a signed-on viewer who has the task at any point in time. So when you are looking to see, okay, how long is this taking? It's been there, I haven't heard anything for 30 days, and I go in and I look and I see, oh, well, the comments went out after 22 days, and now they've been with my design team for 8 days. You're able to see that so you can know at any point in time where anything stands. We will commit, as I said before, we will review it expeditiously. We have shaved 2.5 months off of our commercial plans overall permit issuance time, which I think is quite good. And you can also pay online. You can pay by e-check or by credit card. Either way, you don't have to come in to the office. And even if for some reason you have an application that is paper for some reason, you can still make the payment online. Next slide, please. So the tips, I think there are tips. Design consultation. Did I mention design consultation? We want you to come in. We want you to talk to us. We want to know what you're thinking. We want to know, and we also participate, by the way, very, very actively in park and planning's process. We collaborate quite a bit, but we try to work out anything that might be an issue, particularly if you're doing something complicated like new construction, so that the pitfalls can be identified beforehand. And we will look for ways to cut time to get you going. And there are many, many projects where we do that. Even in some cases where we may allow you to do a demolition, move forward with a demolition under an old site plan while you are moving forward with your other site plan. That at times can happen. We share your project timeline with us. I'm aware, I don't profess to fully understand all of the timelines involved with the opportunity zones. I've done a little bit of research. I know there's a significance to 30 months and 31 months. Regardless, we want to keep you moving. We don't ever want to be something that becomes a critical path item that is interfering with something that you're trying to do. Schedule your inspections. We do next day inspections, except for final inspections. Those have to be scheduled and planned out because there's a lot of coordination for those. But if you call us before noon, you call 311, or you can request it on our website, either way, and we will be out there the next day for you to do the inspection. Hopefully everything is fine. You pass, you move on to the next stage. I don't know if it ties into your construction draws, but it is very critical that we maintain next day inspections to help your construction job move along efficiently. Be informed, as I mentioned, use e-plans, know who has the task. Don't be afraid to talk to us. Come to us. You can on our website, you've got all of our phone numbers, you've got our emails. We want you to talk to us. If you've got a problem, if you think somebody's saying something that's not correct, let us know and we will work with you. I guarantee you it is much faster than going to whoever the county council member might be for an area, or going through the various iterations of another form of communication, whether it's through the executive's office, wherever. Come to us. That's why they pay us. We're here to help you deal with your problems. So we really do encourage you to come to us. Check out our website as well. As you can see, we hope that it's a lot easier to use. There's a wealth of information on it. If we're missing something, because this was just launched about 2 weeks ago, so we're still making little tweaks and corrections, but it's also a living website, a living document, almost, if you will. It will be updated regularly as information evolves. Next slide, please. And I'm going to, Gwen and I picked some of the same slides to pick, but I want you to know, first of all, if we weren't doing our jobs, we wouldn't have the amount of square feet under construction that are under construction. In 2018, for all aspects of commercial construction, whether it's tenant fit-outs, alterations, new constructions, additions, as you can see, we had 37.6 million square feet under permit having work going on. That's a pretty remarkable number, and each year it has been consistently up there. And there are many, many projects, and we make them happen. We make them happen on time, on their schedule to help them. The Pike and Rose, both 1 and 2. I know Gwen talked a little bit about Pike and Rose, but Pike and Rose went through the entitlement process, which is the planning process, in probably about a year, and within a matter of months, they got through their permitting process as well, and then their tenant fit-outs as well. So United Therapeutics, the world headquarters, you saw one building, the Unisphere building, which, as Gwen mentioned, is a net zero building, but that's not the only building. They have like 4 buildings here. They have their world headquarters in downtown Silver Spring with exciting, innovative, gorgeous buildings that we help them get through from their concept through park and planning to their occupancy. And the proof is there. I mean, it's undeniable. Clarksburg Premium Outlets. Clarksburg Premium Outlets, sorry. My words got stuck at my teeth. That one got through park and planning very, very quickly. And even though there was a problem that occurred during construction, from the time they applied for their permits to the time they had their opening with their 92 or 91 tenancies was about a year. So you need it to happen, we will make it happen. Glenstone Museum, I don't know if you all have seen any of the local and actually national articles that have come out on this gorgeous museum. A tribute to sustainability, generosity of the Rails family on this gorgeous museum. Innovative, difficult construction, huge, huge site. And again, we made it happen working with them in a partnership. The National Cancer Institute, where world health cures are being evaluated and serviced. Again, we made it happen on their timeline. The Fillmore, I know Mel is here. That's a picture of the Fillmore. That one had such a tight timeline. Literally, we had our reviewers sitting around the table with the design team, helping them as they were trying to resolve something on a design in order to make certain that it could meet the code and get out and get permitted and constructed on time in order not to lose, again, this happened to be state grant commitments, but the various fundings that were at issue. You need it, we make it happen. The Marriott World Headquarters, Gwen mentioned they were under construction, I think, within a year. Actually, they began demolition within 3 months. They had begun demolition in March. So they needed to happen. You need to have a timeline happen. We will get you there. The Wilson and the Elm, that is the Apex building that Gwen mentioned. I have never seen a more complex project in my life, and I've been around a while. Both from working at a construction company as in-house counsel through the various county projects and over at DPS. Yes, it's got a metro station in it effectively. It's got the Purple Line platform that goes through the building. It is on top of a metro air shaft within a close proximity to the metro and their adjacencies. And, oh, by the way, it happens to have a new entrance for the Red Line for the Bethesda metro station. Very complicated project. And we were out there with them every step of the way, helping them with weekly meetings. They were at risk of being exposed to some dollars because of their agreement with the state. And we sat there, we scheduled weekly progress calls to make sure that we could help them meet their timelines and not run into trouble with that. That is what the Department of Permitting Services does, and we will do it for you as well. The Wheaton redevelopment, that is a building that is under construction that will we will then be situated with Gwen, so she can't get rid of me. Chevy Chase Lake, she mentioned. Elizabeth Square, complicated project going forward. Artomatic, if you've got space that you're looking to do something exciting and innovative in, you've got a building that has some vacancies and you might be looking for some type of creative programming. We will find ways to make it happen so that you can energize the space as Gwen was describing when she spoke. The Silver Spring redevelopment, you're sitting in it. This was, a $250 million investment by Montgomery County, and it spilled over probably into $5 billion worth of investment throughout Silver Spring. And as Gwen mentioned, it's still happening, and we help you make it happen. Top Golf is coming to Germantown, and as soon as we have the plans, we've reviewed them and gotten them out the door, and we can't wait to see that open. The Holy Cross Health Sciences Building, that's up in, I know that's also affiliated with one of the Opportunity Zone sites. We'll help you make whatever the next iteration happening up there happen. And the Washington Adventist Hospital over in White Oak near the Viva White Oak site. So if you want to do it, look to us as your partner to help you do it, because that's how we see it. And we will help you. I hope you will visit our website. Next slide, please. And you can see there's information for our website. If you have any questions, you shouldn't hesitate to call us. And then I have one thing that I'm going to also mention out of my wheelhouse that it's sort of a question and sort of a comment to Frank. I saw Brian Darmody was here. I don't know if he's still here. But the red states and the green states on the tax benefit treatment are very significant, because Montgomery County and the state of Maryland as well has invested a lot in making biosciences and life sciences a reality, whether it is in the Great Seneca Sciences Corridor area or in the Viva White Oak area, which John Jen has talked to you about already today. And North Carolina is a red state, Maryland is a green state. North Carolina has a lot of research where we find ourselves often looking at each other on how we compare. But if we've got a benefit there, take advantage of it. The same thing with California, which has San Diego. You should take advantage. If Maryland is handing you opportunities to do something here with the sciences, do it. That's my spiel. Thank you, and hope that if you have any questions, we can answer them. Thank you very much.
If you'll just go to the microphones for questions for Frank, Diane, and Gwen. Yes.
Everybody wants to go home. It's been a long day.
Yeah. Any questions? Do you mind going to that mic just so they can capture it on the feed?
Hi, this question is for Frank. Frank, in your earlier presentation, you had a slide where the investor had multiple funds to invest in the real estate. And did I read it correctly? There's separate funds for real estate and the business. I'm right here on your left.
Yeah, you can hear me, right? So yes, so in order for that individual, and I think that it's from what I've seen, it's easiest if you've got a few investors that are pulling their monies together. They're going to invest in a single asset because the way the legislation is, it's clear that you're going to be able to receive your incentive versus not. If you are doing hundreds of investors, they're going to invest in multiple assets. But as it relates to that specific example, the investor will benefit from the real estate. I'm not familiar with his transaction and how he's if he's seeking investment into the businesses, but he set up multiple funds in which to make multiple investments over a long period of time. So he will benefit obviously on the real estate transaction, and he probably seeks to benefit on the business transaction. But I'm not counseling him, and I don't know enough of the details to be able to say one way or the other. But he set up multiple funds.
Right, thank you.
Yes.
This question is for Frank and Gwen. Have there been any affordable housing investments in opportunity zones in Maryland or Montgomery County? And if not, have any developers reached out to either one of your offices?
So I'm presently getting, I would say, at least one call a week, of which then results in a meeting, of which then we would discuss the project with our folks, obviously coming from the Maryland Department of housing, we focus on all of our funds are going to affordable housing. And then obviously some of the programs we administer provide the tax credits for other folks that are going to buy those tax credits. And so I would say many of them are in their process in which to then set themselves up to receive investment. And so that is happening. I've met probably with, and most of them are probably larger projects that have been in the works for, when I say in the works, they're not as, I guess they're in areas not as efficient as Montgomery County. And so they haven't started building. They've been working on getting through the planning and permitting process probably for many, many, many more years. But yes, the answer is many projects, I would say more on the larger end, because if they're coming to housing, there's a reason for that.
And my answer is we haven't had an Opportunity Zone project funded by Opportunity Zone tax credits yet in Montgomery County of any kind, affordable housing or not. And that's part of the reason we're doing this event is, I think, to get people very focused on this resource that's available and that we want folks to use.
Thank you.
Question.
Yeah, I had a question for Frank as well. Earlier, I heard you say something about small businesses with 5 employees receiving some sort of benefit from the state. I was wondering if you could expand on that. I missed what you were saying.
Yeah, so just to be clear, and then my colleague stepped out because he probably wanted to avoid the traffic down here, and he's from Commerce. He would be able to answer all the details. But specifically what I said is that the governor has proposed legislation to provide tax credits to businesses that would hire 5 people. So they'd have to hire 5 people. And that could be an existing business that's in the Opportunity Zone, or it could be a business that moves into the Opportunity Zone. But they're going to look for proof for the minimum threshold is going to be 5 new jobs. What the benefit is, my understanding without all the details, it's in essence you're getting the payroll tax that you would normally pay for that person in that job. That's the credit. That's the value of the credit that you would get. And it, what the governor said is it lasts for 10 years. So you're getting that credit for that job. How many jobs there are? They got to be a minimum of 5 for that time frame. That is proposed legislation, so it'll go through that process, and how it shakes out will be how it shakes out. I think given that the economy's doing well, Maryland's doing well, the governor's presumably doing well. He won re-election. It's likely that his proposal will pass, but still has to go through the process.
And going off that, I know you just said you weren't the expert on it, but do you know if the 5 jobs have to be full-time positions, or do you know if they were proposed as part-time?
I don't know the specific details, but I would guess that I would lean towards full-time versus not. So I would say that it's probably, my guess would be is if I was a betting person, I would say it's full-time. I don't know the specifics of the actual details. It does mimic the same formula as More Jobs for Maryland. So if you wanted to kind of get a sense of what the value would be, as well as what the criteria. The only thing about More Jobs for Maryland, it was focused just on Maryland manufacturing companies, whereas this credit is just for any businesses that are operating within opportunity zones or would move to an opportunity zone. Obviously not a SINDIC.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for your presentation. My name is Li Yang. I just wonder if the current system like that, would that be able to help protect the people better, whether that's an individual or family businesses, whether that would be protected better? Because usually it's once you show you have some asset or some equity somewhere, people are targeted to victimize you. So if you had to go through the process or complain, is there anywhere you can resolve better?
I'm not sure if I understand the question, but from a protection of the
Yeah,
investor,
because
the
once
protection
you
of protection of an investor investing into something. Is that what you're asking?
yeah, if you have something you want to go on business, right? You want to buy the property, so you have to show you get some assets or some loan there already. The problem is you have an asset there, then somebody will victimize you, will take your money away, or take your home away, take your business away, close all your account or savings. So you wouldn't usually current system people will say, let's go to the judicial system. Somewhere, administrative or judicial, doesn't matter. It's not working. So I just wonder now your permit services is so good and everything should work very well. Would you be able to resolve the problem? You or she certainly is so unfair and so unjust that you can resolve it.
Thank you for that question. We'll let you briefly respond and get the gentleman behind.
I think your question really has to do with when you're trying to get approved for an investment, whether the information that you're providing is protected.
The information to you is there.
Oh,
The problem is somebody already closed your account. You have no money, no asset, no business anymore.
So your financial information is not provided to the Department of Permitting Services. We do not receive that at all. What we have here is we have information on how you can apply. We don't look to your financial background or your assets or your holdings anywhere when you are applying for a permit. We look to your plans. You pay your fee, which is very straightforward. So there would be no reason for that kind of information to be provided to the Department of Permitting Services, if I'm understanding your
But
your
what I think is
question.
you are saying that you must bring your team to your department. But the problem, your team is either lawyer or consultant. They already targeted you already.
What we would like is the design team. So before you even apply, if you have a project that you are doing, what we would like you to do is to bring your design team to describe to us what your project is, to show us what you're thinking, and then we will have our specialties around the table so that they can be asked questions, we can answer them, so that you can also hear and your design team can hear, well, if you do this way, then you're going to have to think about, maybe you have to do something else a little bit differently, or it might be cheaper if you do it this way. The intent is to help you get your design completed so that it is code compliant and we can approve it, that it is safe, and that's the point of it. And really, we find that sharing information is the best way to get there. That we're not looking at any of your investments anywhere else. You don't have to bring a lawyer to come talk to us. All we're looking for is who's drawing your plans up. Plans in Maryland have to be prepared under the signature and seal of a design professional, whether it's an engineer or an architect, and that's who's going to be drawing up the plans for whether it's your space or your building. And that's who you want to have come to talk with us as well.
Yeah,
Does that help?
If the attorney you just say we have to bring it to you, just right there. Yeah, just right there. If you find my attorney had problem, would you be able to solve it?
We'll take that question after the panel, and you can talk one-on-one. And let's get to the gentleman who's waiting.
We'll answer it after the panel. Okay, we'll let Mr. Cole sit in. Yes, ma'am.
Diane, this is an appropriate follow-up. I wanted to compliment you and Permitting Services because to me, one of the most wonderful things you have is the preliminary design consultation. It is awfully hard to fix something after it's started off the wrong way. So getting it right the first time is something that's very valuable to us. If anybody's got 1031 money, they don't want to waste it. And keep up the good work. That design consultation team saves a lot of people a lot of problems.
That's the intent too. So good. Thank you.
Great. Nice comment to end this panel. Thank you very much. So let's see, I'd like to ask Dan Williams and Aaron Murphy with CoStar Group.
All right, thank you. My name is Dan Williams.
My name is Aaron Murphy.
And we're the local account reps for CoStar. It's never easy to be the last presentation before the happy hour, so we'll try to get through these 50 slides as quickly as possible. First of all, I just want to thank our host, the MoCo team, and the Richmond Fed. What a fantastic event. We really appreciate being involved and being able to participate. For those of you, some of you may know CoStar and be familiar. For those that don't, CoStar is the largest commercial real estate research and investment analysis database in the world. This tool can help you prospect and find new opportunities, help you qualify or disqualify leads, and then also help you complement the internal and proprietary investment selection process that you have and potentially provide an additional couple of metrics that you may not be using. Just a quick overview. I will cover basically what CoStar is and what's our secret sauce, and then Aaron will share some metrics and tools that are available in the interface that can help you identify opportunities, and analyze the investment selection process. So just briefly, we are a group of multiple products, so LoopNet, CoStar, and Apartments.com. We have over 2,000 researchers that are contacting every commercial real estate property in the country at a minimum at least once a month, but typically at least once a week. So that's so that you know that the information that you're finding on our system and our database is up to date and accurate. Next slide. And the CoStar network, we have over 200,000 commercial real estate professionals that are currently using our product. Over 83% of all commercial real estate transactions that occurred last year involved a CoStar user, which is great because you get to know, having access to this information allows you to be competitive and be up to date in any information so that you're bringing the most relevant information and giving yourself the best opportunity to win a deal. Next slide. And so this is a quick breakdown of the 2,000 researchers that I mentioned. We're actually the second largest research institution after the Census Bureau. So again, we have our fingers on the pulse, and we're providing the most comprehensive data set and market analytics to help you be as competitive as possible in the market and really win more opportunities. Next slide. I'll let Aaron take over on some of the metrics that we have available.
Sure. So I think we wouldn't have enough time just in the session today to be able to go through every single application of what CoStar does or can do for you. So the biggest thing that we want to convey kind of to the group here is that we're engaged in business partnerships with many different types of groups that are involved with commercial real estate. So everything from groups that are doing outreach to local businesses all the way to groups that are doing appraisal work or even banks or investors. So I hear, when I do these types of talks, I hear all the time from people, oh, well, CoStar is a tool if you're looking to do commercial leasing, or CoStar is a tool if you're getting into brokerage, or CoStar is a tool for this. And generally, it's one subset of what we do. In reality, we are all of the above. So we're tracking on a national basis 5.3 million commercial properties. These are different stats just showing you the breadth of the database and sort of what we're capturing. So what I'm going to try to do for you is give you a flavor of some of the analytic capabilities that CoStar has, because probably the most common refrain that I get is that's a tool for sort of identifying listings. We want to sort of educate everyone on the broader range of what we're able to do. If you see something here that you feel like potentially could be of interest either to you or to a client that you're working with, the best thing to do would be to reach out to someone from our team or reach out to us. We'll be around here after and set up a broader conversation where we can kind of discuss your particular case. Go to the next slide. This is a brief demonstration of some of the capability and capacity of what CoStar will provide. So this helps showcase at a very granular level sort sort of functionality that CoStar allows our clients to utilize. So what we're looking at on this map is essentially a set of collaborative filters that lets you decide what type of search or what specific types of properties are of interest to you or your clients. So whether it's within a specific classification, such as multifamily, or whether or not it's a particular area, such as an opportunity zone, wherever it is that you want to search, will allow you to filter down and look at just property sets that fit within that. And then we give you a tremendous amount of power to customize that information. So, in addition to the individual property-specific information, what we're doing now is we found an opportunity to work with a lot of groups that are actually, as we mentioned before, the ownership groups and investment groups that are working with these properties. Because what we found is that there's sort of a different lens that folks that are actually doing investing may have when they look at this data as compared to the brokerage community. So the right side of this diagram here is just a brief excerpt from our analytics portal. And basically what this is designed to do is, instead of just giving you specific information about a particular property, we've taken data points in the data collection that CoStar is known for, and we've begun interpreting that data. We've actually brought in-house 90 economists that are analyzing these markets and actually trying to understand, what are these numbers actually telling me? So if I'm not just someone that's going to complete a transaction and move on, but I'm actually someone that's going to be owning this asset going forward, or at least, for example, as we learned earlier in the presentation, probably for around 10 years, because I'm trying to maximize the tax advantages associated with the opportunity zones, it may be important to me to understand not just a 3-year outlook or a 4-year outlook, but I may want to look out and see a forecast of where the market is going. And that's what CoStar is now beginning to provide the capability to do. And that's some of the power that we've been able to do by bringing these folks in-house. Sort of what this is demonstrating is sort of the core, I guess, search that probably most people in the room are going to be interested in. I know everyone came here with interest in the opportunity zones. We're starting to work with some of the different groups that have opportunity funds, as well as groups that are interested in the opportunity zones in general. There were a number of tools that were mentioned today that sort of help identify whether a particular building is in an opportunity zone, or lists of the zones. When we understood that this was important for our clients, what we did is we created a set of basically an interactive filter that will allow you to get updates on what's actually going on within the zones. So if you need to understand, for example, what's available currently or what's coming available for sale within the zones, or specific properties within the zones that could be of interest, we're tracking all of that information live, and we're updating it to be able to continue getting this information. So it's big picture, if there's one takeaway, it's not just listings. It's not just an MLS or like going on Zillow to see what's available. It's a set of tools that help you understand what's really going on in an area, and that's why we work with people in a very individualized and specific, individual focus. We appreciate your time. We have a booth that's just outside the room. If you have any questions, feel free to stop by, at least grab a card. The biggest thing that I've experienced in the 4 years that I've been with CoStar is whenever I meet someone, they always have a conception that CoStar is this, and we're a lot more than that. So stop by. We'd love to stop in with you and talk to you about some of the rest of what we do. Thank you very much.
I was also asked to remind everyone that there's a happy hour afterwards, and you can get to that if you go down Colesville towards Georgia, make a left, and the Astro Brewery will be on your right.
All right, great. Thank you all for staying through the end of the program. I need to run credits and thank some people. Brandon, Lynn, Sarah, Julia, Vinny, Megan, Warren, Al. A lot of this logistical, the live streaming, which I'm getting great feedback on, would not have worked without them. So I really appreciate partnering with you all and all of that great support. Peter and Verlinda are here as well from the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. And I wanted to also just say that thinkmoco.com, Brandon and I will send some information out about today's program. We'll send out the PowerPoints. We'll post them on our website. And then he's working on a plan at thinkmoco.com to further your information and education about opportunity zones and to really be a central point for Montgomery County on this. And then I would just like to say on behalf of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, it was just a pleasure brainstorming and planning this program. And, wow, Montgomery County has so much going for it. It's hard to go back to some of the other communities in our district when I see all of these great things going on here. I've long lifted up this county for the earned income tax credit and used that as an example. And now I have a lot more examples I'll be able to share in other places. But thank you all for being here. We're committed to continuing this conversation and helping to put people together so that we can lift these communities up and have some very successful, equitable reinvestment. So thank you all for being here.
Please join us for a networking reception at Astrolab Brewing, sponsored by CoStar.